Chapter 201, Northern Continent. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Han Xiao had unlocked 2 new abilities and 3 new talents. Bad habit had been gained from reaching the max level of all abilities in Night Stalker. Without hesitation, Han Xiao leveled up all the new abilities to the max as well. Field Controlling Vision LV.10, upon activation, plus 15% fire rate, plus 20% range, plus 22% field vision. Lasts 13 seconds. Cooldown, 12 minutes. Stamina usage, 300. Lethal critical hits, vital spot critical damage increases from 200% to 250%. Dealing 4 vital spot critical hits in 2 seconds has a 0.1%, 1.5% chance of trigger a lethal attack. Proficient combat, plus 5 STR, plus 3 endurance, plus 6% melee attack, plus 4% parry chance. Proficient shooting, plus 6 dex, plus 8% firearm attack, plus 4% fire rate. Bad habit, vision will not be affected by the night, able to detect surroundings with sound. When fighting during the night, plus 5% dex. He used about 12 million points of experience to max the levels of these abilities, in which he spent the most points in medium enhancement and meticulous repairs. After all, they were the main class abilities of the second tier class. There were still a ton of experience points in the interface. With all these abilities reaching the max level, Han Xiao's strength had increased by at least 20%. The enhance and repair abilities were the main abilities of mechanic class. One such ability was energy magnetic enhancement, which increased machinery affinity by 33% when it reached max level. Han Xiao clearly felt that he suddenly understood machines more deeply, and the speed and quality of him building machines increased tremendously. It was just right for him, as his class up requirement was to build 5 purple quality pieces of equipment with a rating of more than 60. Increasing his ability to build machines would help him meet the requirements. 5 high quality gear in purple grade and the ratings had to be more than 60. It was quite difficult. The rating of equipment in Galaxy followed a very easily understood system. Legendary quality low-level gear would not give as many attributes as purple quality high-level gear. A high-level and high-quality gear would be much more valuable. Han Xiao still had a large number of experience points left after maxing all his abilities. By choosing a suitable mechanical blueprint and maxing its level, it would greatly increase the quality of the final product and multiply the success rate by more than 7 times. Han Xiao contemplated for some time and decided to fuse blueprints first to have more choices. With more than 100 million EXP, he could splurge on fusing basic knowledge. Of course, he was not randomly fusing them, he only fused for the machinery that he felt would be reliable. After all, there were way too many combinations between the basic knowledge, and with every fusion, the experience points required would double. If he did not use them wisely, even 100 million experience points would not be able to fill this infinite pit. After continuously infusing tens of times and spending millions of experience points, Han Xiao received tens of new blueprints that spread across various types with different uses. He carefully picked 3 pieces of machinery for the class change mission. Compounded magnetic chain split blades, iron fist mounted heavy mechanical arm, can be disassembled, mini maneuvering equipment. Not only did these 3 suit the requirements, but Han Xiao also felt they would be useful to him. Compounded magnetic chain split blades was a weapon that was similar to the magnetically controlled retractable armor. It had a magnetic round metal plate as the body, and a few detachable magnetic blades filling the core with magnetic energy would activate the magnetic chain. The blades would then be dispersed and hover around the core with spaces in between. If one blade was within a certain distance of another, they would repel each other, and if they are more than a certain distance apart, they would attract each other, which provided a medium-range combat solution. The controls of compounded magnetic chain split blades were cumbersome and unique. By using energy to adjust the structure of the magnetic chain, the blades could be turned into different shapes. With the combination of certain gestures, the blades could be used for both attacking and defending in many forms. It took some practice, much like the magnetically controlled retractable armor had. The blades could be put in different pockets and combined together during use, which was convenient for stealth purposes and suited the Viper. This was also superhuman equipment for a mechanical pugilist. Iron fist mounted heavy mechanical arm, can be disassembled, was a type of mechanical arm. Different from the lightweight mechanical arm, the size of it was very huge. It was many times bigger than his arms. Its power source was the built-in motor and engine. As its size was very huge, it had a high requirement of the user's strength. Han Xiao had to wear Viper to meet its requirements. Han Xiao chose this because it could be disassembled. This meant that it could be used as part of Viper for enhancement if needed. Many maneuvering equipment looked like a belt. It could shoot out bursts of air that allowed the user to jump midair, and its fuel was very expensive. There was a fitting device built in so that it would not fly off without the user. It would tire the user to a certain extent, but Han Xiao was practically immune to it with his amount of end. The most important thing this device gave Han Xiao was agility. He would be about to make turns in midair and perform all kinds of tricky movements, drastically increasing his mobility. He had chosen those 3 pieces of machinery to attempt making purple quality equipment. He wanted to give his mechanical suit melee weapons so that it would cover the close-range weakness of the sniping style. The other blueprints such as cannons, landmines, and bombs were not suitable for making a piece of purple quality equipment as there was not much room to improve. He immediately maxed the level of the 3 blueprints, which cost around 1 million EXP, but it was nothing to him with all the experience points he had. There's not enough materials on the plane. Han Xiao looked at his inventory. He had not restocked in the Western continent. He pondered for a while and decided to make use of the max level medium enhancement and enhanced all of his current gear. As he was keeping himself busy in the plane, it flew at a constant speed toward their destination, the northern continent. One day later, the plane landed at the coastline of the northern continent. Han Xiao walked down the plane. He got goosebumps from the surrounding cold air. It was freezing in the northern continent. Han Xiao rubbed his palms against each other and breathed out a fog of hot air, opened a map, and said, "There are 4 novice villages in the northern continent, too. The highest level players should also advance to LV20 soon." The clock was ticking. Han Xiao hurriedly asked the pilot to take off again as soon as the plane was refueled. He arrived at the first novice village in the northern continent very soon and was greeted with warm welcomes. The players in the northern continent had been waiting for him for a long time. They had been reading about the players in the western continent showing off every day with envy and anticipation. It was finally their turn to show off. Of course, the players in the southern continent were even more upset. Han Xiao stood in place, and the players queued to give him money and experience points with smiles on their faces. The numbers on the interface kept growing. Suddenly, a commotion broke out among the crowd. Hao Tian walked out of the crowd as the players around him stepped aside. "I want to buy the referral letter," Hao Tian said. Han Xiao looked up. He recognized Hao Tian, a pro player who had around the same level of skill as Li Ji. Hao Tian gave the money and took the referral letter, keeping an emotionless expression throughout. He took the mission and left without wasting any time. At this time, Han Xiao heard the conversation between the surrounding players. "Didn't Hao Tian finish all the missions in Novice Village? I thought he left 2 days ago." "No, I saw him come back with my own eyes. He stayed till today. Probably waiting for the mission from Black Phantom. It's not worth wasting 2 days for a pro player. I would wait 10 days if I could get the mission from Black Phantom." Han Xiao's eye twinkled. Hao Tian seems like quite a good choice. Chapter 202, Alumera, 1. Including Hao Tian, Han Xiao had already come in contact with many pro players and given them the missions. The way to complete the mission was through a communication device. He gave the pro players his number and email, and the mission would only be completed once they sent over the details so that he could complete his own mission. If there were any mission items that needed to be handed to Hans, he would have to take the plane and retrieve it himself. As compared to doing them himself, ordering highly skilled players to help him complete these missions would save him a lot of time, and he could just sit back and enjoy the profit. Among the pro players that came to accept the missions, many had been very strong players in his previous life, and Han Tian was at the top of that list. Han Xiao was rather interested in Hao Tian, but since he had said that he would only be amazed when the mission was completed, he was patient. Han Xiao spent most of his time on the road as he was rushing between the novice villages in the northern continent. During this time, he used the max level medium enhancement and upgraded his gear and improved their attributes. He also tried to build the 3 pieces of equipment that he had chosen, and he was rather satisfied with the results. He was able to achieve blue quality on the first try, which meant there was a chance to reach purple quality after some practice and familiarization. There were already players that had reached LV19 on the level leaderboards. With Han Xiao's pace right now, he would be able to finish all the novice villages in the northern continent before the first player reached LV20. As for Andrea, Han Xiao did not think that he would be able to make it, but he did not want to go to Andrea anyway as it was the headquarters of the Germinal organization, which meant it was very dangerous for him. Also, the players had all been forced to leave the novice villages and were scattered around everywhere. All in all, the risk far outweighed the profit for Han Xiao. In the Planet Aquamarine panel on the forum, players in the northern continent were the happiest. The second most excited were the players from Andrea in their minds. After Black Phantom finished running through the novice villages in the northern continent, he would go to Andrea next. Well, that is awkward. Han Xiao sighed. The weather in the northern continent was cold. Its terrain mainly consisted of snowy fields and icebergs. Thin snow danced in the air, fog surrounded the mountain top, and a clear line separated the black-green mountain body and the snow-covered white peak. The third novice village was called Frost Pine Village. It was in an ice-sealed forest valley, where fierce beasts roamed. The plane landed outside the forest, and Han Xiao crossed the forest with his electromagnetic hover boots, following the radar. The beast roars from afar reminded Han Xiao that the northern continent was filled with beasts, and many of them were of a rather high level. As I remembered, the sharp claw ice bears on one ice field are all high-leveled, between LV 53 to 56, not including the elites or boss. I can meet the requirements to unlock lethal shot talent there, Han Xiao thought. That ice field was quite far, so Han Xiao decided to head there after he finished with the novice village. He noticed another thing as he looked at the map: the Alumera family's territory was not far from Frost Pine Village. Not long after, Frost Pine Village appeared in his sights. He calmed his mind, slowed down, and walked over. In the woods 100 meters away from the Frost Pine Village, a dozen or so people who were all wearing combat suit, firearms, and daggers sat in a circle arranging their equipment. They were a combat team from Alumera, following their order to capture some Inhumans in the Frost Pine Village and bring them back for research. The captain, Keaton, was smoking a hand-rolled cigar with a vicious face. He pulled out a blaster and said, "Everyone knows the combat plan. Don't mess up. Relax, it's just a bunch of Inhumans, piece of cake. If they dare to resist," Keaton patted the grenade on his waist. "You don't have to be stingy with these little toys, blow them to smithereens." The team started laughing. Also, these Inhumans look the same as normal people from the outside, so don't capture the wrong ones. Keaton looked at his watch and commanded the rest to stand up. "Arrange your gear. We move on my signal." At this time, a human-shaped shadow passed the alley outside the woods. A member pointed over and said, "Captain, there's a passerby over there. Is it an Inhuman?" "Probably, there are many beasts in this forest, only Inhumans would be alone. Capture this one, and we will complete the mission." They were eager to do it. However, they waited for a few seconds, then realized that the captain was not giving any response. They looked back and were hit with a shock. The lips of the usual fierce and vicious Keaton were trembling in fear. His face was pale, and even the cigar dropped onto the floor. "What's wrong?" A member was confused. Keaton gulped before saying, "The plan is cancelled, leave now." "Why?" The team was surprised. "That's not an Inhuman," Keaton said in anger. He's Black Phantom. He had a conflict with the family not long ago." "Black Phantom?" Everyone in the team was stunned. They wanted to look over and confirm it but realized the figure was gone, the shadow had disappeared. However, they heard the voice of a stranger appear behind them. "I heard you were calling me." Everyone was stunned. They turned around rigidly and saw a black shadow standing behind Keaton, looking at them curiously. They felt a chill run down their spines. Keaton was horrified. He did not notice Han Xiao move behind him. The voice from Han Xiao was almost like a clap of thunder that made his heart jump and sweat even in such cold weather. Han Xiao raised his eyebrows. He had sensed them from afar. The reason that these armed men were this nervous in front of him was most likely that they knew his identity and had hostile motives. "Are you going to tell me yourself, or do you want me to help you? You can try lying too." Han Xiao bent his fingers. 7 blades flew out from the pockets on his waist and legs, floating in midair as they locked onto Keaton's vital points. Blue quality compounded magnetic chain split blades, their damage was based on the user's energy usage, and they were able to form many weapon shapes while maintaining a very high attack speed. The equipment had an ability called revolving slashes. Once activated, all the blades would form a circulation like a clown throwing balls, inflicting multiple wounds at high speed. It was a great melee weapon before LV-60. From the player's perspective, this thing would be god-tier equipment in the early stages. Han Xiao had spent more than 1 million experience points to be able to get this blueprint. Keaton was terrified by the floating blades. He hurriedly listed the team's identity and mission without leaving anything out. When he heard that they belonged to Alumra, Han Xiao's eye twinkled. He easily understood why these people were afraid of him. He had helped Lu Cheng to attack Alumra's territory back in the Green Valleyville and stood against them, but when he saw the rumors on the dark net, Alumra only wanted to revenge Lu Cheng but did not mention him at all. I should be their enemy, are they, scared of me? Han Xiao was suddenly interested. He put back the compounded magnetic chain split blades and said, "Go back and tell your leader that I will be visiting very soon." Keaton's tight nerves loosened. He immediately ran away without daring to look back, and the rest of the team followed. After running for a few hundred meters, out of breath, Keaton stopped and looked back. When he was sure Black Phantom had not followed them, he let out a sigh of relief. He was soaked in sweat like he had just gotten out of a pool, and his heart was beating extremely fast. "Captain, what now?" Fear still lingered on everyone's face. Keaton swallowed his saliva and said, "We go and relay the message to the bosses. Black Phantom is in the northern continent, and he wants to visit us." The eyes of Daryl, the leader of the Alumra family, opened wide and round like an angry bear. "We have yet to find him, and now he dares to find us first. He's totally disrespecting us. I'm going to kill him." The third in command, Qi, was a Sharnak. He was huge and had dark skin. "Don't be so impulsive. He's not to be messed with lightly. He definitely has some backing and no fear if he dares to find us alone." Daryl stared across. "Xiaojin, what's your suggestion?" Xiaojin pushed his monocle and said calmly, "He only said visit. If he wanted to attack us, he didn't have to tell us. We should make contact with him and see what he wants. Maybe he's not planning to engage combat." Daryl frowned and said, "I will see him myself and see how he's going to explain killing our men." Chapter 203, Alumra, 2. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Frostpine Village was a poor novice gathering point. Poor meant there were many missions, therefore, although the players had low-quality equipment, they had accumulated a lot of experience points. Many players bought abilities from Han Xiao, and they were taking photos with him from time to time. He was like a celebrity, the crowd appeared wherever he did. Han Xiao left Frostpine Village in a plane after staying for 1 day and harvesting experience points. He brought along all his equipment and went to the Alumra family. He did not feel a sense of belonging to the family of his original body, but he was unavoidably curious about it, so he wanted to ask around about it. Since Alumra was still pursuing his original identity, Han Xiao was very interested in making contact with them. Alumra family, a big warlord in the northern continent, they were partners with Theseus. Within the planet, they have 24 colonies of which 5 are large territories. They are very rich, they are registered as a legal financial organization in Theseus. They are involved in businesses, politics, and many other fields, which are controlled by different factions in the family. The Alumra family is separated into 4 factions internally, which consist of the Home faction led by Daryl, the Xiao faction led by Xiaojin, the Red Island faction led by the third chair Qi, and the more relaxed Local Alliance Northern faction. Alumra is a warlord organization made by the alliance of organizations from dead countries. The Home faction controlled the big picture, and the other factions are under them. They took in many loose warlords and became one of the strongest warlord organization in the northern continent. Then they accepted the request from Theseus to be part of the government forces and acquired government backing. They have not made any big movements recently and have mostly been settling tricky problems for Theseus, especially regarding Raylan. The situation in the northern continent was different from the other continents. Unlike other nations that were peaceful, the conflict between Theseus and Raylan was very intense. Killing happened very often, and soldiers, agents, and superhumans battled in secret. Hatred was deeply rooted in both nations. Theseus and Raylan were both very invasive countries, and one mountain could not fit 2 tigers. For more than 20 years, they had not stopped trying to defeat and erase each other. Only recently, when they decided to work together for the expedition to conquer the Germinal organization, did they pause. Alumra's headquarters are full of danger. They dread my identity and strength only because they have a huge influence, but I am their enemy nonetheless, so there might be a fight. A large colony sat halfway up an ice-covered valley, Alumara's headquarters. It was a great strategic location as it was easy to defend but difficult to invade. There were only two routes into the colony, one was through the mountain, and the other was by climbing the cliffs at the side. Both were heavily guarded. The mountain rocks were black-green, the snow was white, and the wind was piercing. At the juncture on the way up the mountain, a sentinel wearing a thick cotton coat was scanning the area as usual. He then suddenly saw a shadow in the snow far away. "Someone's coming." The sentinel warned his friend to stay alert. The shadow soon revealed itself fully and appeared in their sights. The sentinels straightened their faces. It was none other than Black Phantom, whom the leader had ordered them to keep an eye out for. Han Xiao's eyes twinkled. The juncture was heavily guarded, just as he expected from the intelligence that he had gathered. He wondered what Alumara's attitude toward him would be. Before long, he was given the answer to that question. After a short wait, the juncture opened, and a man surrounded by a team walked toward Han Xiao. He stopped in front of him and said with a fake smile on his face, "Mr. Black Phantom, welcome to the Alumara family. I'm Amil, here to lead you in. Please follow me, the leaders have been expecting you." Well, looks like the fight will not happen so soon, and from the way he was talking, they are probably planning a feast at Hong Gate 1. Sigh, how troublesome, couldn't it just be solved by the simplest solution, violence? That wouldn't be barbaric, it's going back to the basics, skipping what was in between and starting the fight right off the bat. It would save everyone some time. Time is money. Sigh, I'm already here anyway. Han Xiao lifted the single-shoulder backpack that was filled with machinery and followed Amil up the mountain path. The path wound among clouds, and the guards followed beside the duo as they passed one juncture after another. Han Xiao kept a serious face all along. Amil kept wanting to ask him questions but did not dare to because of the expression on Han Xiao's face. He contemplated again and again, then asked with a laugh, "The leaders were very surprised when they heard you are coming. After all, there was some discord not long ago. You guys are very curious about why I'm here." "Yes, we are not exactly friends, but since you are coming, I believe you have a friendly motive," Amil said. "I'm here to look for trouble. I have yet to decide who to kill. How about we start with you?" Han Xiao asked. He, with your strength, you wouldn't have to visit if you wanted to kill us mid-level cotters," Amil said without changing his expression. "That's not a funny joke." "Is that so?" Han Xiao scanned through the guards beside them. They were expressionless, their fingers were placed at the trigger at all times, and they looked cold, hard, and masculine. But the cold sweat dripping down from their sideburns and their short and rapid breathing showed that they were not as calm as they looked. The guard captain secretly looked over and was immediately caught by Han Xiao. He looked away the next second with horror in his eyes. But they seemed to find it funny. Han Xiao's expression resembled a smile yet not a smile. He patted the captain on the shoulder, and he clearly sensed the captain's body tighten for a moment. Amil was smiling on the outside but was angry on the inside. He's not here for a friendly reason. Not sure why he's here. Han Xiao squinted his eyes and asked out of the blue, "Amil, right? What faction do you belong to, home or the others?" Amil's expression became unnatural. He coughed and said, "I'm a member of the Alumara family, that's all." Han Xiao smiled and did not say anything. They kept silent till the door of the territory appeared in sight. Amil was relieved. "We're here. The leaders are waiting for you in the hall." The door opened, and hundreds of soldiers came forward, staring at Han Xiao. They seemed to have confidence in numbers. Amil was leading the way in front. He walked very slowly on purpose to spend more time in the middle of the armed forces with the motive of planting fear in Han Xiao. Han Xiao understood what was happening, but he was not affected. Suddenly, he saw a floating ID outside the crowd. There were players here. Makes sense. Alumara is not far from Frostpine Village, so some players that left the novice village will have come here. Han Xiao narrowed his eyes. There are already players in Alumara, so why are they still capturing Inhumans? There were many possibilities. Han Xiao did not think much about it and left the thought in the back of his head. His goal was Alumara, it did not matter if there were players present. What are these soldiers gathering for? Dozens or so of players discussed the situation softly from afar as they looked at the crow. They all had a bamboo rain before their names. They were members of the Bamboo Rain Guild, a small casual guild with less than 100 members who were all young people. The guild leader, Bamboo Rain Fragrance, was a beautiful young girl with long hair. They seemed to be welcoming someone. Is this an unexpected event? Let's go and take a look. Maybe we can trigger some missions, the somewhat handsome Bamboo Rain Fly said. Then he looked at the rest of the members inquiringly. Of course, no one objected. This group of players from Bamboo Rain Guild was the only players in this colony, and they had only found it by chance. There was not much information included on the maps of this place that were sold in the novice village. The map on the players' interfaces was full of fog. The places would only be revealed if they went there themselves or bought a map for it. They walked toward the crowd, and Bamboo Rain Xian yelled with surprise, "That's Black Phantom." The group was shocked. They took a closer look and confirmed they were right, then looked at each other in awe. Why is Black Phantom here? The people here seem to be hostile toward him. Bamboo Rain Fragrance frowned and pondered aloud. He just appeared in various novice villages a few days ago, so there must be a reason he's suddenly here. Bamboo Rain Xian's eye brightened up. This is an unexpected plotline. There might be hidden missions. Lucky, I have yet to see Black Phantom. Now I can learn abilities from him without going to a novice village. I remember there are some video posters looking for footage of him. They stopped in front of the hall as they saw Han Xiao entering it. The hall was a high-level area that was not open to them. They needed enough relationship points to enter, but Black Phantom could just go in. They were frustrated. Let's all wait outside, Bamboo Rain Fragrance said. He might come out very soon. Chapter 204, Alumra, 3. The hall's structure reminded Han Xiao of the ancient kingdoms described in books. It was spacious with rows of chairs on both sides, and at the end was the master seat covered in the hide of a white bear. Lining the walls were guards on high alert. The hall was filled with high-ranked officials of Alumra. They turned to look at Han Xiao almost simultaneously, with coldness and hostility in their eyes. Many of these people thought that Han Xiao had vicious intentions by coming here all of a sudden, so the majority of them disagreed with meeting the legendary killer who was possibly an enemy. They had heard of the things that Black Phantom did, and they knew that Han Xiao was elusive, so they had no idea what he would do. However, Xiao Jin said that since Han Xiao was a killer, it would be safer to meet him face to face. There were guards in the halls as well, all of whom were ready to pull the trigger any time. Superhumans also hid in the dark, which gave the high-ranked officials of Alumra some sense of security. Black Phantom. Dello, who sat in the master's seat, waved his hands casually. Give him a seat. A guard pulled a chair over and placed it in the middle of the hall like it was for an integration. Han Xiao knew that they were trying to plant fear in him. He had come alone, and Alumra definitely wanted to stand their ground. Han Xiao did not care. He placed the enormous single-shoulder backpack on the floor and sat down steadily. Don't you want to introduce yourselves? Stop acting, Dello said coldly. You've definitely already gone through our data in the darknet. Han Xiao scanned the Alumra members in the hall and noticed something quite interesting. These high-ranked officials were seated separately. The ones belonging to the Home faction sat around Daryl, while Xiao Jin, Sen Chi, and the North faction all sat separately. This detail showed that there was some strong conflict within Alumra. There were also a few very strong hidden presences around. Han Xiao was guessing that if the meeting went bad, he would be attacked in a split second, which of course would not be a problem for him. Most of Han Xiao's attention was on Xiao Jin and the members of his faction. He was scanning through them discreetly. These were the family of his original body, and they had almost killed him. Bang! Suddenly, Dello slammed the chair handle and yelled, "In Green Valleyville, you attacked our territory and killed our men. What's your explanation for that?" The atmosphere tensed up immediately. Those strong presences started to tense up as well, and the other factions were acting indifferent. Only the Home faction was full of hostility. Han Xiao remembered that he had killed one of Xiao Jin's foster sons, but Xiao Jin had a poker face. Han Xiao could not figure out what he was thinking. So what if I killed them? If you're not happy about that, fight me. Han Xiao's expression resembled a smile but not a smile. Dello could not believe that Han Xiao was so arrogant in his territory. He was almost shocked for 1 second, then it turned into rage. You. Before he finished his sentence, Han Xiao suddenly said, "You worked with the Germinal organization. I won't be the only one that comes looking for trouble with you. The 6 nations will, too." The crowd was stunned. Working with the Germinal organization? Since when? Dello forced the shouting down his throat and suppressed his anger as much as he could. What are you talking about? We have never worked with the Germinal organization. Zero, whom the Germinal organization is offering an enormous sum for, was a member of your family, Han Xiao replied. How do you explain that? Daryl suddenly realized why Black Phantom attacked them for no reason. It was because he had mistaken them for having a connection with the Germinal organization. The team that was searching for Han Xiao might have been discovered by Black Phantom when they passed by the Green Valleyville. Having heard that the Germinal organization was Black Phantom's enemy, Dello realized that he had found the cause of the questions he was searching for. He shook his head and said, "You're wrong. The wanted Zero is Vice Leader Xiao Jin's second son, Han Xiao." Han Xiao frowned. He looked at Daryl discreetly with eyes that were filled with unspoken meanings. Dello continued speaking. But Han Xiao is already not related to us. Furthermore, the Germinal organization putting a reward for Han Xiao means he's their enemy. There are more reasons for us not to be working with the Germinal organization. It seemed like Alumero wanted to cut their ties. Han Xiao's eyes twinkled as he slowly lured words out of their mouth. He purposely acted as if he was speaking in a very serious manner and said, I believe, with the intelligence of the Germinal organization, they definitely knew Han Xiao belonged to you. You are the best clue they have. Why wouldn't the Germinal organization contact you? Dello's face was stunned. They really didn't contact us. You think I'll believe that? Do you think the Six Nations intelligence organizations will believe that? Han Xiao said coldly. There are too many suspicious parts to the story. I can only assume that you are helping the Germinal organization find a wanted man, and there's even a possibility that that wanted man was sent by you to do things for the Germinal organization. Dello frowned and said, That's completely not true. There's more to this. I would like to hear what more there is then. Han Xiao had no fear. His attitude made Dello clench his teeth. For the family's sake, they had to cut ties with the Germinal organization very clearly. The war between the Six Nations and the Germinal organization was about to break out, so if they were misunderstood, Alumero would be in a dire situation. Although Han Xiao had come alone, Daryl did not dare do anything to him. After all, he was Black Phantom, with his identity and strength. The fact that he was there might even have been an order from the Darknet. If they killed him, the Darknet would become their enemy, and it would prove the fact that they were working with the Germinal organization. Most importantly, Black Phantom was unfathomable. The people in the headquarters had no confidence in killing him, and finding out if they could was not worth the risk. Therefore, at this point in time, Dello could only endure the arrogance of Han Xiao. He stared at Xiao Jin with a fierce look. He felt this was all caused by Xiao Jin. Therefore, he spun his eyes and said loudly, Okay, Leader Xiao, you shall tell him the details. Xiao Jin looked at Dello faintly. He turned his head and said, Xiao Hai, tell him. A handsome young man walked out from behind Xiao Jin, his expression rather vicious. Xiao Hai, the first and best son of Xiao Jin, partly in charge of the Xiao faction. He was someone with actual political power, and Xiao Jin had raised him to take his place. 1 year ago, I was guarding a convoy of supplies and was attacked midway. Han Xiao went missing. I have no clue what happened to him afterward, Xiao Hai said coldly. This time, a leader from the northern faction said, More details, please. Our guest doesn't seem to believe it. Xiao Hai let out a grunt and said, The attackers came for me. Han Xiao is my brother, so I made him look like me and divided their attention as bait. Only then I could escape successfully. I went back searching with more troops afterward, but we weren't able to find him. Han Xiao raised his eyebrows. So, you let your little brother die for you? Was he willing to? What do you think? Xiao Hai was already annoyed. The crowd chatted among themselves, eyes with all kinds of different emotions fixed upon Xiao Hai. That is what happened, Dello said. We can show you more evidence, and whether you believe it or not, we have no relationship with the Germinal organization. Han Xiao nodded. He had already received the information he needed: what happened to the original owner of this body and the attitude of his family toward him. When he mentioned the original owner of this body, the people in the Xiao faction treated it like it was a stranger. This was especially so for Xiao Hai, who did not show even a shred of remorse toward killing his own little brother, and Xiao Jin had no problem with that. In conclusion, the original owner of the body was not loved by anyone, Everyone treated him like nothing. You had a pretty hard life, Han Xiao thought. The people in the hall suddenly realized something. What happened to controlling the situation? When did it become Black Phantom interrogating us? This is our territory, what about our dignity? Chapter 205, Assassination. You killed my foster son, Xiao Jin suddenly said. This is a private matter, Chieftain Xiao, Han Xiao replied. Let's discuss it privately. Sure. Xiao Jin nodded. The crowd's eyes twinkled. Black Phantom's reply to the same matter was completely different. Daryl showed unhappiness on his face but did not say anything. Han Xiao turned his head to look at Delo and said, It's late. You don't mind if I stay the night, right? Xiao Jin, take care of him, meeting dismissed. Delo stood up and walked out. The crowd walked past Han Xiao with different expressions on their faces. A man walked up to Han Xiao, smiled, and said, I'm Xiao Ming, a foster son of leader Xiao. I will be taking care of you during your stay. Please follow me. Han Xiao looked around and realized that Emil, who had brought him here, was missing. The internal conflict in Alumera is really very severe. The tense atmosphere in the hall earlier on further proved his point. With such thoughts in his mind, Han Xiao walked out of the hall. Suddenly, a dozen or so players surrounded him with excitement on their faces. They were all from the Bamboo Rain Guild. Bamboo Rain Xian enabled the recording functions. We want to learn abilities, Bamboo Rain Fragrance said. Han Xiao surely would not miss out on an opportunity to earn some experience points, so he casually opened the ability interface. Xiao Ming, who was standing on the side, asked in surprise, Do you know them? Han Xiao shook his head. Black Phantom seems to be very popular among the Inhumans. The Alumera members who happened to pass by noticed this, and they were rather surprised. The Bamboo Rain Guild wanted to trigger missions, but Han Xiao did not make any other interactions. He walked away after stopping for a few seconds. It's an unexpected plotline, but there's no mission. Bamboo Rainfly was confused. Seems like my recording has nothing of interest, Bamboo Rain Xian said in frustration. Xiao Ming arranged a room for Han Xiao. Although Han Xiao's attitude in the morning had made many of the high-ranked officials very angry, he did explain the source of his hostility. Therefore, the atmosphere was not all that tense. That night, Xiao Jin invited Han Xiao to his mansion with the purpose of discussing compensation. Upon arriving at the place, Han Xiao realized that Xiao Jin's children were all gathered around, including Xiao Hai and other brothers and sisters. However, the foster kids were not there. Xiao Jin had the same expressionless face as he had in the day, unpredictable. Han Xiao was looking at Xiao Jin and his children, and these people were looking at him, too. What compensation do you want? Han Xiao looked at Xiao Jin and put on a smile that did not really look like a smile. It's his bad luck that he died. Xiao Jin's expression was cold. To him, foster children were just assistants and tools. Then why did you invite me here? Han Xiao raised an eyebrow. There are no downsides to getting to know a famous killer. Han Xiao could not figure out Xiao Jin's motive, maybe it was just to build a relationship, maybe there were other motives. Anyway, Han Xiao was interested in making more contact with the family of his original body owner so he could lure more information out of their mouth. They chatted casually, talking about all sorts of things. Xiao Hai and his siblings said a word or two once in a while, and the atmosphere was peaceful. Xiao Hai was the leader of the siblings. One could feel a sense of adoration when the siblings talked to him, but Xiao Hai did not react to it, as if that was the norm. 1 hour had passed without anyone's notice. Han Xiao suddenly frowned and said, I'm very interested in Han Xiao. Let's talk more about him. The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Xiao Jin put the cup down and said slowly, he's my son. He has always been incompetent, but I didn't think he would become wanted by the Germinal organization. I thought he's dead for sure, Xiao Hai said. No wonder they say scourges last for 1,000 years, he's still bringing us trouble. Han Xiao pointed at himself and said, You mean I'm trouble? Xiao Hai gave a cold laugh and said, Are you not? With a light cough, Xiao Jin said, It's getting late. Indeed, it is. Han Xiao stood up and left. Xiao Ming brought him back to his room. He passed a stack of documents to Han Xiao as he walked through the door. This is Han Xiao's information. Father had told me to give it to you. Han Xiao nodded and accepted it. As soon as Han Xiao entered the room, He checked every corner of it thoroughly. There had been 3 monitoring devices before he left, and now there was one more. He shook his head and used a program to crack it once again. After he was done with that, only then did he start reading the documents, from which he gained a deeper understanding of the original owner of his body. He was basically a nobody, and he did not hear about any NPC called Han Xiao in his previous life either. Sigh. Han Xiao shook his head. He had made contact with Alumira to know more about the original owner of his body, and he had already achieved that. Whether it was Alumira's attitude or their internal problems, none of that mattered to him because it had nothing to do with him, and his so-called hostility was just a form of showing his strong stand. Alumira was already sucking it up and did not want to become his enemy, so Han Xiao would be stupid to kill their people in their headquarters. There was no benefit to creating another enemy for himself for no reason. Once Alumira knows I'm Xiao Han, I wonder how they will react. Han Xiao put the documents aside, lay on the bed, and closed his eyes. He planned to leave the next day. At midnight in Delo's mansion. It's all because of that asshole Xiao Jin that Alumira has been sucked into this. That asshole has been building up his power with no worries at all. He's obviously trying to seize power. However, the North faction is my ally, and Sechi's Red Island faction has always been neutral. What does he have to dare oppose me? Delo clenched his teeth. When Alumira was created, it had been peaceful internally, but when the size of the organization started to snowball, conflicts started to happen. As the master of the house, the home faction gained most benefits and were in the middle of the conflict. Although all the factions followed the orders on the surface, they all had the ambitions to take over and seize power. Luckily, after all these long years of partnership, they were all connected to each other deeply, so none of them dared do anything too over the line. A murder was nearly impossible to happen. Even if there was one, it was planned in secret. Xiao Jin posed the largest threat, and Delo was the one who secretly planned the attack on Xiao Hai, which sadly failed. They had only managed to kill Han Xiao, who did not matter at all. Who would have thought that after 1 year, the Han Xiao who nobody cared about would become a wanted person with an outrageous reward from the germinal organization and bring the family such a horrifying enemy? Thinking back now, Delo was filled with regret. At this time, Delo's son, Lagos, walked in and said, "Father, Black Phantom has left Xiao Jin's mansion." The meeting lasted for 1 hour and 37 minutes. Xiao Jin is becoming more unbridled. Now he even dares meet Black Phantom privately without my consent. Daryl was enraged. What do we do? Just let Black Phantom leave. Don't mess with him. But he dared to be this arrogant in our territory. Lagos was unconvinced. I said don't mess with him. Delo slammed the table in a rage and shouted, "Get out." Lagos clenched his teeth and closed the door after he walked out. The moment he turned his head, his expression turned vicious. As the sky started to brighten, loud noises woke Han Xiao up, who was in a light sleep. He jumped out of the bed and looked outside through the window. Alumira members were yelling and rushing somewhere. What happened? Han Xiao asked in confusion. Footsteps closed in rapidly, and dozens of soldiers surrounded the room with guns. Black Phantom, don't move, one of the captains shouted. These soldiers' mission was to control him. They were all in a state of nervousness and could open fire with the slightest misstep. Han Xiao saw the people outside running in another direction. Seems like something has happened, but it's not about me. Han Xiao squinted his eyes and watched things unfold. Not long after, the captain seemed like he had received an order. He yelled, "Come with us." Han Xiao wanted to know what had happened, too, so he followed the nervous soldiers. To his surprise, they went to Daryl's mansion. It was already extremely crowded, the high-ranking officials from all the factions had come. They were looking furiously at Han Xiao, and the latter was rather confused. Han Xiao only discovered what had happened after he walked into the mansion. In the office, Daryl sat on the chair with his head facing up, a bloody blue hole on his left eye, penetrating through the back of his head. The blood on the wooden floor had already coagulated, and the metallic smell of blood filled the room. The dead body's hands hung from the shoulders, and the legs pushed against the table, holding him on his chair. The leader of Alumira had been assassinated. Cause of death, gunshot. The bullet entered through the eye into the brain, penetrating and leaving through the back of his head. He would have died on the spot. From the size of the bullet hole, the killer used a high-caliber handgun, and the leader did not show any sign of resistance. There are no clues at the scene that showed any signs of the killer ever being here. Han Xiao suddenly understood why the others were looking at him that way. Daryl died in the night, and being the killer who came without invitation, he was the most suspicious. Also, the killer used a high-caliber handgun, and the assassination style was phantom-like. There were too many coincidences. He was being framed. Han Xiao blinked. He took out a cigarette from the pocket, lighted it up, and inhaled deeply, blowing out a smoke ring in the face of the surrounding nervous soldiers. Now this is interesting. Chapter 206, The Real Killer, 1. The soldiers surrounded the place securely. The high-ranked officials had different expressions. The home faction was furious, Xiao Jin's faction was frowning with confusion on their faces, Red Island faction led by Qi and the northern faction all had surprise on their faces. They couldn't believe it. Get him. Lagos's face was twisted. Xiao Jin frowned and stopped him. There's more to this. Black Phantom visited us in bright daylight. There's no need for him to do such a thing. What if that's exactly what he made us think? One of the chieftains of the northern faction said. Then why did he have to visit us? It's more discreet to assassinate him. Xiao Jin said. Our guarding power is strong, he wanted to get in. Someone said. He's the killer, and you still want to find excuses for him. Lagos was emotional. He took out his gun and pointed at Han Xiao. Qi who stood on his side hurriedly stopped him. Calm down, there's no motive for Black Phantom to do this. Motive? Lagos was enraged. He stared at Xiao Jin, clenched his teeth and said, Is there no motive? Xiao Jin frowned and said, You're overthinking. The northern faction and the home faction agreed they should first control Black Phantom, who was the most suspicious, then get on to find more clues. Qi felt Black Phantom was too dangerous, and suggested to question Han Xiao on the spot, but was interrupted by Lagos, who believed they couldn't trust anything Black Phantom says. They were unable to come to an agreement. The soldiers surrounded Han Xiao. Many strong presences in the dark were locking their attention on him, and the high-ranked officials also had their attention on Han Xiao. Even as they were discussing, they were ready to engage the moment Han Xiao does anything suspicious. Han Xiao thought to himself, the result of framing me to take responsibility for the assassination is a conflict between Alumra and the Darknet. Only the third party will benefit from it. Could this be the goal of the people behind all this? If I start a killing spree, it would also fall right into his trap. It was planned for me to be in such a situation where my actions are very restricted. Han Xiao could kill his way out anytime. He didn't care about making Alumra angry, but if he did it, it would be falling into the trap of the people behind this, as escaping would mean he admitted he was the killer, and killing someone creates hatred. He also could not just let them capture him. It seemed like the plan made by the person behind this had worked. I've only been here for 1 day, and they could make the assassination look like I did it. There has to be someone who's an expert in assassination that has been here for a long time, and my arrival had given them the opportunity. Unless they could find the real killer, no matter how many things showed that Han Xiao had no motive to do it, he would still be the most suspicious person without any solid evidence that proves otherwise. After all, no one can truly know someone else unless they can read their mind. Logical assumptions could not be taken as evidence. Wait, evidence? Han Xiao had a flash of insight. It hasn't been long since Delo was assassinated. The crime scene was not checked thoroughly yet. The killer might have left some clues. This time, the discussion between the high-ranked officials had come to an end. Lagos yelled, Black Phantom, disarm yourself and surrender. Xiao Jin added, if you didn't do it, we will investigate clearly. Han Xiao smiled, you know that's impossible. How about you guys disarm yourselves? Both parties couldn't trust each other. There was no way they would take the risk of disarming themselves. It was a problem that had no solution. However, Han Xiao had a thought. There's no point of continuing this argument. I can stay temporarily, and you can send people to monitor me 24/7. I will wait till you find the truth. He said. Han Xiao was very curious about who was framing him. He felt it was quite interesting. Well, that is one way to do it. Qi said immediately. He wasn't wishing for a conflict. Before Lagos said anything, someone in the crowd suddenly fired his gun. Han Xiao reacted quickly and activated the magnetically controlled retractable armor. The bullet was deflected. However, this had made the soldiers, who were all in a highly nervous state, lose their control and all fired at the same time. Fire! Conflict broke out in an instant. Someone fired unexpectedly on purpose. Han Xiao's eyes became serious. The scene was chaotic, but he saw the person who made the shot clearly. It was an ordinary soldier. Bullets emerged from every direction. Han Xiao had no choice but to deal with the shootings first. The enhanced magnetically controlled retractable armor had an outstanding level of defense. The bullets only made sparks on the armor and couldn't penetrate through. Energy flowed through his body and went into a circular metal plate on his head. The compounded magnetic chain split blades was activated. 7 sharp blades flew out of the pockets and shot out like a storm. Many soldiers' gun muzzle was cut off. They backed off in horror and bumped into other soldiers on the exteriors. The firepower of the enemy started weakening. Just as Han Xiao was about to go for the soldier who made the first shot, the superhuman guards hidden in the dark acted. Hong. Suddenly, a fire appeared in the crowd, not 1, but 4. 3 pugilists, 1 esper that could turn his entire body into fire, all pounced towards Han Xiao at the same time. Fists covered in fire smashed down hard. Bang. Cracks spread out on the originally standing flow. The walls started to crack open as well. Han Xiao made it in time and jumped up in the air. Suddenly, Han Xiao faced a heat wave coming towards him. The person covered in fire straightened his arms. A snake-like pillar of fire flew towards Han Xiao. Usually, one has nowhere to escape to during mid-air, but Han Xiao was an exception. He immediately switched on the mini maneuvering equipment on his waist. The boxes on the edge of the belt made a turbo-like sound and shot out a jet stream of air. The belt emitted a strong force, almost like an invisible hand pulling Han Xiao to the side. The fire snake slid by his back and hit the wall, creating a large scorch black hole. Level 46, 48, 49, 3 pugilists, and 1 esper at level 45, all grade D superhumans. These should be the high-tier power in Alumra. If it was before, he would have had some troubles, but now that all his skills were at max level, he was much stronger. It wouldn't be much of a problem for him even if he didn't wear his mechanical suit. In fact, he was more concerned about the soldier who fired first, but he realized that the young soldier was killed in the previous round of chaotic shootings. Han Xiao felt a thump in his heart. He didn't believe this would be an accident. Seems like the people who framed me are deeply rooted in Alumra. They saw me taking a step back and decided to attack me on purpose, to cause a conflict. With these thoughts, Han Xiao had more clues. He put the thoughts away and focused on dealing with the 4 superhumans and the soldiers. He spun his hands. The revolving blades covered him like a protecting storm, slashing almost 10 times per second, inflicting wounds on the 3 pugilists who were just closing in. Everywhere he walked past, the weapons of the soldiers were cut into pieces. He used this sort of weapon in his previous life before. It didn't need much practice. He was a pro in it instantly. He purposely held back and didn't kill anyone. Magnetically controlled retractable armor, electromagnetic skateboard shoes and other equipment he carried around all the time, all went through precise enhancing modification. Their attributes became much stronger. Han Xiao's own combat power had also peaked due to all his skills being at max level. Han Xiao didn't even need Viper modified to deal with these 4 superhumans that had a lower level than him. He only needed compounded magnetic chain split blades as a close-range combat weapon to defeat them. Han Xiao's health had reached 3,800 points, not far from a pugilist of the same level, and he also had the magnetically controlled retractable armor. He was very tanky. On the other side, members of the Bamboo Rain Guild witnessed Han Xiao defeating a group of soldiers and 4 superhumans. Bamboo Rain Guild recorded them with excitement. That is a recording that has the potential to go viral. Bamboo Rain Fly said in surprise, "I thought Black Phantom was their guest, but from what they are saying, it seemed like Black Phantom killed their leader. I made a scan just now. All 4 NPCs that are fighting Black Phantom have a danger level of extremely dangerous. What they say in the forums are right. Black Phantom is at the top tier in terms of strength even amongst the NPCs." Bamboo Rain Morning Wind rolled his eyes and said, "You don't say. Which NPC that gives main storyline missions are not strong?" SHHH Bamboo Rain Fragrance made a hand sign of asking them to keep quiet. She stared at the scene and said, "Keep quiet and watch the storyline." The destruction power of superhumans far exceeded normal people. The entire mansion collapsed in the heated battle. The high-ranked officials had already escaped in rage and nervousness. More superhumans were on their way here. They definitely could kill Black Phantom, if these 4 guards were able to stall him, that is. Blades slashed open the fire, iron fists clashed against the armor. Han Xiao moved around with horrifyingly high mobility. The 4 superhumans could only barely hit him despite putting in all their efforts. Han Xiao purposely faked an opportunity for them to attack and lured one of the pugilists to a close range, then used the thermoelectrical incisor gloves to counter-attack and defeated one person first. He then used the blades to form a storm and slashed wounds all over the fire-controlling Esper. His magnetically controlled retractable armor had very good heat-insulating abilities, fire dealt very limited damage to him. The two people left soon had an even harder time dealing with Han Xiao. Whoosh! The blade slashed open the flesh of the pugilist and shot out through his body, causing blood to shoot out from the wounds. This pugilist ended up twitching on the floor with heavy injury and was unable to move. Shit! Lagos was shocked. Black Phantom defeated the 4 guards in much shorter time he expected before the backup could arrive. The scene was now filled with broken bricks and ruins. No one could stop Black Phantom anymore. If he were to start a killing spree, many of the high-ranked officials would die. Whoosh! A blade hovered before Lagos. He backed up in terror, but the blades followed him like a shadow, till Lagos fell on the ground, fear and anger contorting his face. It was at this time Han Xiao kept the blades back. He wiped off the blood on his face and said coldly, "I can kill you people, but that would be falling right into the trap of someone else. Our terms remain unchanged. I can stay until you find out the truth, but if you insist on capturing me, I don't mind gifting you a few slashes." His fingers turned inwards as he was saying, the blades danced in the air and formed a flower shape. The motive of threatening was clear. Chapter 207, The Real Killer, 2. Lagos clenched his teeth in anger. Before he could say anything, Xiao Jing cut in and said, "We accept your terms. I personally believe the assassination had nothing to do with you. It's a conspiracy intended to spark conflict between both parties." The high-ranked officials agreed in silence. Black Phantom was even stronger than the rumors said he was. He defeated the strongest people in the headquarters without even using his sniping style which he was known for. These people were not weak, but they paled in comparison to Black Phantom. They were not on the same level. The backup finally arrived at this time. Xiao Jin immediately ordered the soldiers to keep their weapons, showing sincerity on their side. Seeing so, Han Xiao kept his weapons too and walked towards where he resided in. The nervous crowd split up and opened a path. Xiao Jing gave Lagos a faint look, then turned his head and ordered, "Clean the scene up." Lagos was filled with fury. One of the high-ranked officials from the home faction helped him to get up but was pushed away instantly. "He could have killed us, but he insisted he's not the killer, should be trustworthy." Qi whispered. "Naive." Lagos said coldly, "If he kills us, all of Alumera would become enemies of the Darknet till the very end. He's doing this so we won't suspect him." Having returned to Han Xiao's residence, the interface showed a notification. "You have triggered an urgent mission, The Real Killer. Mission introduction, you are framed and dragged into a conspiracy, becoming a chess piece used by the people behind this. Mission requirement /S, confirm the real killer and accomplish the mission, you have only one chance. Reward /S, random ability or talent X1. Han Xiao's eyes twinkled. It's a puzzle type mission, with only one chance. There were many types of missions. The puzzle type was rather common. Some required the players to collect clues like a detective. Sometimes the clue would be provided, but it was all rather vague. The final decision was to be made by the players. There was no notification after quite a long wait. Han Xiao guessed this mission belonged to the latter type of puzzle mission. With Alumera's suspicion towards him, he probably would not be able to find out any clue. It's best to wait and see, Han Xiao thought. At the same time, Bamboo Rain Guild triggered a different mission. A shocking change in Alumera. The leader of Alumera was murdered. Black Phantom, who came to visit out of nowhere, became the biggest suspect, but he claimed to not be the killer and suppressed objections with his raw strength. Alumera might seem to have submitted, but some factions still strongly believe Black Phantom is the killer. What information is hidden within? There are 5 stands you can take on: Black Phantom, Home Faction, Xiao Faction, Red Island Faction and the Northern Faction. Changes cannot be made after choosing. Reward /S, rewards will be given based on different stands and contribution. The basic reward is 50,000 experience points. Bamboo Rainfly exclaimed in shock. At least 50,000 experience points. 50,000 experience points were an extremely large amount for them. There really always were benefits wherever Black Phantom went. What position will you guys be choosing? Black Phantom for me. Me too. Everyone agreed. They didn't know Alumera very well, and Han Xiao just defeated all of Alumera's military power. It was obvious following Han Xiao would be the most reliable. Players of Bamboo Rain Guild approached Han Xiao and expressed their willingness to help. Han Xiao was surprised. He thought about it and guessed that these players probably received different missions, with a different identity. The mission requirements that were triggered would be different as well. Usually, in an area where something happened, missions would be triggered. Follow me then. In a corner somewhere, two people were talking to each other. The conflict did not happen, our man died for nothing. The intelligence said Black Phantom was a serial murderer, but he held back this time. What a misstep. Luckily the clues have been destroyed. As long as the truth cannot be found, Black Phantom would still be the biggest suspect. Next day, the home faction hosted a simple funeral for Dello. The atmosphere within Alumera became more and tenser in the next few days. Everyone seemed busy. When they looked at each other, their eyes were filled with unknown emotions. However, Han Xiao had become almost invisible. It was like all the factions forgot he was even here. No one approached him except for the full 24 hours of surveillance. After chasing the players of Bamboo Rain Guild away to seek information, Han Xiao stayed in the room with a calm mind. He had expected this to happen. He was an outsider, and the biggest suspect, but Alumera didn't have the confidence to deal with him, so they could only leave him alone. Even if Han Xiao wanted to look for clues, none of the faction would give him any. All he could do was wait. But the wait was not meaningless. The factions had started their own investigation and plans. Han Xiao was thinking, Dello died very coincidentally. What good would it do to frame him for killing Dello? Firstly, creating hatred between Alumera and Darknet would only benefit the third party. Secondly, there were other motives for killing Dello, and he was just used as a very good excuse, since with his strength and identity, it was easy to frame. If the real killer framed him to hide, then his identity would most likely be a party that would benefit from this, which has the highest possibility to be other factions other than the home faction. Han Xiao remembered that the internal conflict within Alumera was very serious. Killing Dello could very likely be an act done to seize power within the family, using him as a convenient suspect. But going back to the first possibility, the real killer would still be the third party, which also made sense in the second possibility, creating conflict between the home faction and other factions, leading to Alumera collapsing internally. Sigh, I don't want to think anymore. Han Xiao rubbed his eyebrows. Anyway, it didn't matter who the real killer was, he stood undefeatable. As long as he doesn't make any move, only the real killer would become more and more stressed. There was no way this mission would be a long-term one. The impact of Dello dying would surface in a very short time, and by then, there would definitely be someone who would unintentionally leave some clues. In one mansion, the high-ranked officials of the home faction gathered. The atmosphere was intense. Leader has died. Who is going to be in charge now? A tall and muscular man said. He is Dello's younger brother, Todd. Me, Lagos said coldly. Todd forced a fake smile and said, Lagos, I don't think that is suitable. What do you mean? Lagos frowned and said. You should call me uncle. Todd said in a more serious tone, the lead, my older brother passed away. We are all family here. I should be the one in charge according to precedence. Humph, only a few days since father has died, and you're already seizing power. Aren't you too impatient? Lagos said in a mocking tone. Don't blame me for not warning you, but, without father's suppression, Xiaojian, Qi, and others are all making their plans. The position of the leader is now vacant. Who knows what they will do? They may look like they were filled with sadness and regret during the funeral, but they were probably laughing uncontrollably in their hearts. Todd laughed, sneered and said, Don't say it like that. I was worried you'd make mistakes because you're inexperienced, but since you think you can do it, uncle shall not compete with you. Now tell us, what do you plan to do next? Lagos grunted and ignored Todd's tone. Our top priority now is to find out who killed father, he said. Todd frowned. He felt the priority should be suppressing the ambitions of other factions and regain control of Alumera, but it was inappropriate to express such feelings in front of the high-ranked officials of home faction. Therefore he followed with the topic and asked, any clues? Lagos said coldly, Black Phantom is the most suspicious. Nothing he says can be trusted. I have already informed some people to contact the strongest killers and mercenaries. Once they arrive, we won't have to be afraid anymore. We will just capture Black Phantom and interrogate him. I have spent a large sum this time. The people who are coming are all famously strong. Maybe it really wasn't Black Phantom. Someone whispered. Lagos stared over and said coldly, then it has to be Xiaojian. That asshole is very ambitious. he has been under father for so many years and he's definitely not satisfied with it. Right, I heard Black Phantom stayed in Xiaojin's mansion the night the assassination happened. Maybe Xiaojin hired Black Phantom with a huge sum to assassinate father, then put on a show together to fool the others. Everyone was shocked. Chapter 208, The Real Killer, 3. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. If Xiaojin really worked together with Black Phantom, then the situation is very bad. It would mean he controls a very strong force, he could even seize power with raw strength. Someone said. Todd shook his head and said, they won't dare to. If something happens in the headquarters and high-ranked officials of all the factions are slaughtered, our men in other places would revenge the enemy till their death. Xiaojin is not stupid. Also Black Phantom is an outsider, and according to the rules, an outsider cannot interfere with our internal changes. Lago sneered and said, foolish, how would you know Xiaojin didn't find a better place to go? Is there no organization behind him? His heart might not even belong to Al'Umma anymore. With his eyes closed, Xiaojin asked, what's happening in the home faction? Lagos is in charge of everything now, they are currently investigating Delo's death but has yet to make any progress. By the way, Delo's mansion was destroyed by Black Phantom during the battle, and so were the clues. Xiaojin paused what he was doing and asked, who ordered to bring Black Phantom to the scene? The team leader that went to keep Black Phantom in control is called Miri. He was killed by stray bullets during the scrimmage on the day. Stray bullets, Xiaojin shook his head, what is Black Phantom doing? He asked. He did not act. Intelligent choice. Xiaojin nodded and said, before the truth about Delo's assassination is unveiled, no faction is willing to approach him, anyone that does will become a mutual target of the rest. Xiao Hai said, the Inhumans are working for him, I still do not know why he can easily order the Inhumans. Leave him alone, he can't be the real killer. After a pause, Xiaojin asked, what is the Red Island faction and Northern faction doing? They are working with the home faction to investigate for clues. Xiaojin rubbed his temple and let out a sigh, dogs that bite surely don't bark. Qi sat in the office, he pulled down all the curtains and made a call and said in a very quiet voice. Major General, what should we do now? What are your thoughts? Delo is dead, the leader's position became vacant, there must be a vote for a successor, I will be entering as a candidate, hope you can give me support. Sure, I will use my relationship network to help you gain votes of the high-ranked officials, when you control Al'Umma, remember how you got there, don't forget our promise. Definitely. Qi let out a sigh of relief as he hung up the phone, a vicious and hideous smile appeared on his face, the skin lines of his Sharnak wrinkled together. Han Xiao was patient, he stayed in the room every day while the players from Bamboo Rain Guild helped him to gather intelligence, it wasn't much, but at least he was not totally uninformed. As rewards, Han Xiao was not petty in giving missions to the players in Bamboo Rain Guild then earning their experience points by opening his ability shop, he was making a fortune one way or another. As mentioned before, as long as Han Xiao's ability level is higher than the player, learning the ability again would increase its level. The great technician Han's abilities were all at max level, it was more than enough for this requirement. Players in Bamboo Rain Guild continuously spent experience points in his ability shop, they were willing to pay the price and Han Xiao was willing to let them. My basic combat is at max level. Bamboo Rain Fly triumphed in happiness, the other guild members all came to check out its attributes. Bamboo Rain Xian said in sadness, mine is only at level 7. Bamboo Rain Fragrance smiled and said, that's because you sleep for so long every day, you're never online long enough. These players did not restrict themselves in what they were saying, and Han Xiao heard everything. He had noticed something magical, when the players are talking to each other, the system would usually censor any content that had anything to do with it being a game, but he could hear it, it was definitely because of the interface. Ta, ta, ta. A steady footstep closed in. Peng, the door was pushed open, dozens of soldiers stood outside, Lago stood in the crowd with his hands behind his back and said coldly, Black Phantom, we suspect that you worked together with Xiaojin to kill my father, now get up and come with us. Where did you get the confidence from? Han Xiao raised his eyebrows, Lagos kept a low profile for so many days, now that he suddenly engages, he must have found help. As expected, Lagos sneered and stepped back, two people stepped out of the crowd, one man and one woman. I see. Han Xiao patted his pants and stood up, Seems like you spent quite a lot of money, he said calmly. The man and woman were a married couple, Luan and Vanessa, legends of the mercenary society, with a position similar to Han Xiao's in the killer society. Their strength was also at the peak of the third tier in Planet Aquamarine. They lived all the way till version 2.0. Lagos had people contact them secretly, many rejected as soon as they heard they had to fight Black Phantom. They didn't dare to become enemies with Han Xiao. Those who came had absolute confidence. He had investigated thoroughly this time. He knew these two people were on the same level as Han Xiao, and it would be most safe to hire both of them together. Black Phantom definitely could not defeat them head-on. Lago sneered and said, "When I capture you, I will make sure you spit out everything you know." Han Xiao shook his head and said, "Isn't it good to be alive?" "Humph, quite arrogant I see." Luan was a muscular black man. He rubbed his fists and said in disdain, "I heard you are very good at sniping, but now I'm only 3 meters away. I won't give you a chance to even fire one shot, and how many of my punches can you endure? Be good and disarm yourself, or I will brush the floor with your brain juice." A third voice appeared from an empty area. "It's been long since we met, Mr. Black." This voice sounded familiar. Han Xiao raised his eyebrows. "Invisible Demon? You're here too?" Invisible Demon did not reply. Murderous intent filled the air. It was not 2 strong opponents but 3. Han Xiao smiled as he shook his head. No wonder Lagos was so confident. He really spent a huge sum to deal with him. Feeling the hostility from the 3 strong opponents, Han Xiao smiled. The change he was waiting for has finally arrived. It was an opportunity for him to showcase his absolute superiority in his strength. The players of Bamboo Rain Guild didn't know what to do. They couldn't mess with any of these extremely dangerous NPCs. Hue! A stream of piercing wind passed by Han Xiao. Han Xiao made it in time to activate his magnetically controlled retractable armor. Invisible Demon's nails scratched on its surface and created fire sparkles. In a few months' time, Invisible Demon increased 2 levels and became slightly stronger. Back then Han Xiao could not win Invisible Demon. It resulted in a tie. But now, they were on completely different levels. Han Xiao raised his hands. Compounded magnetic chain split blades formed a cyclone slashing through the air. Numerous damage numbers appeared in the air. Wounds opened and blood dripped down, and then disappeared in the next instant. Invisible Demon could retract his skin to hide his wounds. Invisible Demon was shocked by the compounded magnetic chain split blades and backed off hurriedly. Before Han Xiao could make the chase, a wave of air pressure shot towards him. Vanessa pounced forward with her fists raining down hard. Han Xiao raised his hands to parry but they became numb. His STR was inferior to Vanessa. Both Vanessa and Luan were pugilists near level 60. Their STR, Dex and End were all much higher than Han Xiao, who was a mechanic. Suddenly, Luan caught up quickly. His 2 fists combined into one and turned into a black meteor covered in flames, hitting Han Xiao's chest armor plate. With pain felt on his chest, Han Xiao's interface showed a high amount of damage. This was an advanced tier ability of Pugilist. It is a vibration hit that ignores part of the physical armor. Players in his previous life called it hitting the cattle across the mountain. Pugilists who learned advanced tier abilities were difficult to deal with. It had given Han Xiao some amount of pressure. Without a change of expression, Han Xiao backed up holding guns in both hands. High-caliber bullets shot out rapidly. The power of his firearms increased furthermore as his shooting abilities reached max level. Vanessa rubbed her hands and emitted a diffused sphere air shield. It deflected the bullets and disappeared. Shockwave blast. Han Xiao frowned. Another advanced tier ability. Pugilist was popular all the time. Its abilities were flashy and comprehensive. This time, players of Bamboo Rain Guild fired. Although they clearly knew they were no match for the enemy, they knew they had to help now since they chose to side Black Phantom. Careful about positioning, do not close in, fly and cool attack continuously. Xian, don't go too close. Bamboo Rain Fragrance yelled and gave out commands. She had experience in leading a team during dungeons. She used the same strategy when they were attacking dungeon boss. Inhumans. Luan was annoyed. He covered his eyes with his arm. The bullets were deflected by his protective flames, unable to penetrate his skin. Vanessa straight away swung her leg sideways. Air blade flew out like a whip and slashed all of Bamboo Rain Guild's players in half through the waist. They turned into white light and disappeared. Bamboo Rain Guild was fully destroyed straight away. The difference in strength was too vast. Within a short moment, Han Xiao picked up his equipment bag full of machinery and dashed into the room. Luan was just about to follow but Vanessa stopped him. Careful, he's a mechanic. There might be traps, she said. Luan nodded. He punched the floor strongly, cracks spread out from the center of the punch and the entire house started shaking. No matter what trap Black Phantom had placed, it would all become meaningless once the house was destroyed and the battlefield turned into an open area. Lagos hastily brought the soldiers to back off far away. Boom. The house collapsed, dust and ash obstructed vision. Luan squinted his eyes and saw a shadow jumping out of the ruins vaguely. He immediately dashed forward like a warhorse, his fists punched forward like a hammer, leaving bright marks behind. Fall! Luan yelled. But the next moment, he heard the buzzing sound of energy and a cold metallic voice. Enhanced mode. Bang! Luan felt like he had hit a metal wall. No, even metal wall would be destroyed by this punch, but it had only made this indestructible wall back off a little more than 10 centimeters, and then the metal surrounded his fists. Chapter 209, The Real Killer, 4. The dust dissipated, and the shadow's true form appeared. A heavy mechanical left arm, many times larger than a normal arm and made of a dense black platinum alloy, was holding onto Luan's fists tightly. Han Xiao, who was controlling this enormous mechanical arm, was already wearing Viper. The close-fitting black streamlined mechanical suit looked expanded like a human's muscles. Everyone was stunned. What is that? Han Xiao's right arm that did not equip mechanical arm strongly grabbed Luan's arm. Luan wanted to escape, but he realized that Han Xiao's strength became almost as high as his. He was shocked as he could not escape for the time being. Viper provided close to 80 points of strength and 50 points of dexterity. Han Xiao's strength, dexterity, and endurance were not lower than any pugilist under level 60. Luan was still reacting based on their difference earlier on, and it caught him by surprise. Han Xiao's heavy mechanical left arm buzzed and slammed Luan's head heavily. Luan's head was bashed into the floor, but the punches did not stop. They continually rained down on him, and the damp on the ground expanded rapidly. Iron Fist mounted heavy mechanical arm, left. Quality, blue. Basic stats. Damage, 385 to 488. Defense, 226 to 230. Power level, 77. Durability, 986/1050. Requirements. Minimum strength, 45. 45 to 90 strength, plus 45% attack speed. Greater than 90 strength, plus 15% attack speed. Stats provided by this equipment is not taken into account. Additional effect, S plus 28 STR. Length, 1.24 m, including exterior armor. Weight, 85.5 pounds. Additional ability, Bionic, human, able to perform actions like a human arm, does not restrict the user's arm movements, very flexible. Additional ability, Iron Fist burst multiple energy cores, engine and motor, activate maximum output simultaneously to create a bursting heavy hit, dealing 170 to 213 points of blunt damage. 25% chance to ignore mechanical suit type armor. 24-second cooldown. Additional ability, shock resistance exterior armor is made of platinum alloy. Increases durability, harder to wear out. Special feature, can be disassembled. Remarks, this huge fist will bash your skull. Since he was acting alone, Han Xiao had brought along all his ace cards along in his equipment bag. The heavy mechanical arm had been disassembled into parts to become more portable, and the assembly process was easy and quick, capable of being performed during the battle in a short time. Vanessa was raging as she saw Luan pressed against the floor. She dashed forward hastily. Han Xiao did not dodge or back up. He battled Vanessa in close range. His fists and legs contained a huge amount of power, and the floor split open inch by inch. Shockwave Blast was a mid-range ability that hardly dealt any damage to the mechanical suit as it lacked power. Viper's enhanced mode steadily gained the upper hand. The two of them were extremely agile, so their fight looked like two blurry shadows in the eyes of the others. Only the constant explosions and destruction showed how dangerous these two were. The black fist hit Vanessa's face multiple times, her nose was bleeding. At the same time, Luan finally pulled himself up off the ground, his head bleeding all over. He growled and pounced over. However, when he was halfway there, Han Xiao suddenly swung his fists and pushed Vanessa to the side. His right hand pulled out the ghost sniper rifle behind his back and aimed at Luan. The black muzzle gave an even more dangerous feeling than earlier on. Luan's hair stood up all over his body. Han Xiao pulled the trigger. Flaming will. Lethal critical hit. Overload. This shot was his strongest shot ever. It was not just the active abilities, the passive abilities had also made the firing power, critical chance, and machinery affinity much higher, and the firearms were also enhanced as much as he could tune them. Everything pace of gear was on a higher level than before. This was the strength of every ability being at max level. Bang! A huge hole appeared on Luan's chest, and blood spurted out like a fountain. After damage reduction, you have dealt 1942 damage to Luan, LV 58. Extremely close to 2000 points of damage. Luan health was only between 4000 to 5000. One shot, almost half of his health. Luan kneeled on the floor, his entire body twitching. He raised his head and looked straight at Han Xiao with disbelief. Didn't you say that you were going to wipe the floor with my brain juice? An emotionless mechanical voice came from under the cold mask. Han Xiao pressed Luan on the floor with his right hand. His left hand bashed Luan's head, again and again. Luan was paralyzed by the shot and did not have his energy protective layer. Metal continuously kissed his skull, his flesh was torn open, and his bones were scattered into pieces. The splashing blood colored the floor and the mechanical arm red. Han Xiao's jumped up high into the air with his mechanical arm and dropped straight down. The ground shook with a loud noise, and dust shot up into the sky. The ground was filled with white and red, and Luan's eyes slowly lost their gleam. You have killed Luan, LV 58. You received 175,000 experience. Lethal shot, unlock progress 43/50ths. Luan. Vanessa screamed in sorrow, rage, and hatred. Then, she turned and started fleeing. Black Phantom was much stronger than expected. She did not want to die for nothing. She only had a chance to revenge if she stayed alive. That's why I said, isn't it good to be alive? Han Xiao shook his head. He unbuttoned the heavy mechanical arm, and the enormous metal arm fell onto the ground with a thump. He then gave a command. The armor slid open on both sides of the ribs, and a row of concentrated small holes appeared. Dozens of arrow-shaped shadows shot out and landed around Vanessa, which then exploded and created a high-pitched sound wave. These were all mini sonic bombs. Han Xiao had made them into even smaller arrow shapes and added a simple ejecting module onto Viper, which allowed it to shoot this kind of simple and portable disabling weapon. The determining attribute for the sonic bomb was endurance. Although Vanessa was a pugilist, she still could not endure dozens of sonic bombs. Thus, she fell to the ground in agony. Han Xiao jumped over in a few steps, then activated the thermoelectrical incisor gloves and grabbed Vanessa's eyes. He then turned on Sunworm Flamethrower. With screams of pain and the smell of burning flesh, Vanessa turned into a piece of charcoal in no time. All of her desperate struggles against death were in vain, blocked by Viper. Han Xiao let go of the body and let it fall onto the ground. He then activated all kinds of scanning modules. Through analyzing his smell, the scanning module highlighted Invisible Demon's position. He was in the area where the sonic bombs exploded, trembling in pain. Invisible Demon was absolutely terrified by Han Xiao. It had only been a few months since they fought, and Black Phantom had reached a height that stunned him. He deeply regretted accepting this mission and very soon had the thoughts of backing off. But unfortunately for him, he had been blasted away by the explosion just as he was secretly escaping. Saved me some effort. Han Xiao broke Invisible Demon's arms and legs, then took out a mini GPS and injected it into Invisible Demon's body roughly. He slapped him into unconsciousness and nodded in satisfaction. I won't lose him this way. The area became ruins. A large number of Alhumorous spectators had gathered, and their faces were filled with shock. They were all horrified by Han Xiao's actions. The revived players stood far away with their throat feeling dry. This. So strong. Bamboo Rain Xian exclaimed. She had recorded the entire fight, and she had a feeling it would definitely go viral. Black Phantom had never shown the mechanical suit. The already high strength that they had seen before was just the tip of the iceberg. This was his true strength. No, maybe Black Phantom was still hiding more. Bamboo Rain Guild was excited. They realized that they had discovered information that others did not know about. They were the only ones that met this unexpected plotline out of all the players. Lagos' expression was terrified. His teeth were shaking, and his legs were trembling. The three people that he had high hopes for had been killed easily. They would most likely have been able to defeat Black Phantom if it was just his original strength, but who knew he hid such a horrifying ace card? How is this possible? All three of them were among the strongest superhumans and long-renowned legends. I have consulted the experts. How did Black Phantom kill them so easily? Lagos could not believe it. Without anything to rely on, Lagos' entire body trembled as he faced Black Phantom with a strong murderous intent. Filled with regret, could not even begin to describe his emotions. Han Xiao walked toward Lagos and tapped him on the shoulder. He said softly, "I have already given you a chance. You can't kill me." Lagos looked fierce on the outside but was horrified on the inside. "I'm the person in charge of the home faction. If you kill me, home faction will..." Before he even finished his sentence. Slash. The blade cut across his throat, and blood splashed slowly. No hesitation. Lagos's eyes widened. He held his neck and fell down. His body temperature lowered as blood escaped from his body, and he looked at Han Xiao in disbelief. Han Xiao looked at the high-ranked officials of the home faction. He played with the blade covered in blood and said calmly, "Do you have any problems?" Chapter 210, The Real Killer, 5. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The home faction was furious as they looked at Lagos' corpse, but they did not dare provoke Han Xiao. After all, a real-life example of what would happen if they did was right in front of them. This time, Todd walked out of the crowd and said, "This was all Lagos' idea, he deserved it. On behalf of the entire home faction, we absolutely won't hold a grudge for this." The home faction was surprised. They did not expect Todd to stand out at this time, and he even admitted their fear toward Han Xiao. Words said under such circumstances had to be taken with a pinch of salt, and Han Xiao did not agree or disagree with his words but asked, "You are Todd, Delo's younger brother, Lagos's uncle. I'm in charge of the home faction now." Todd forced himself to be calm as he spoke. The home faction gave him a weird look. They were amazed by Todd's ability to grab the opportunity to take over the home faction as soon as Lagos died, but Todd did indeed speak their mind. Therefore, they all kept silent and accepted Todd's position. The people that they had hired who had such great strength had easily been killed. Han Xiao's strength was overwhelming. Everyone knew that if they still wanted to spark conflict, it would be no different from suicide. One thought appeared in all the factions. Black Phantom could not be messed with. "Find another room for me," Han Xiao said as he looked at the ruins and put his machinery away. "I'll arrange it for you," Xiao Ming immediately replied as an order from Xiao Jin. The high-ranked officials exchanged looks after Han Xiao left. Black Phantom has overwhelming strength and doesn't care if he becomes our enemy, yet he still insists to claim he's not the killer. "Maybe he really didn't carry out the assassination," Qi said. "But he killed Lagos, that's a new grudge," the head of the northern faction said. Todd stopped him and said, "Lagos did this to himself, and he deserved it. Our home faction will neither seek revenge nor hold grudges." The others looked at him with despise while selectively choosing to forget that they were thinking the same. "Then what do we do with Black Phantom?" someone asked. "To let an undefeatable monster stay in the headquarters would make them feel very insecure. He just wants to get rid of the suspicion," Xiao Jin said coldly. "Once the truth surfaces, he will naturally leave, so don't mess with him." Upon arriving at his new house, Han Xiao woke up the captive Invisible Demon. He had planted a locating device in Invisible Demon's body and could know where he was without seeing him. "What do you want?" Invisible Demon was horrified. Han Xiao took off Viper, returned it to his bag, and said with an interested tone, "I heard your invisibility came from a laboratory experiment accident and your skin mutated. If I strip your skin off, it must be worth quite a fortune." Invisible Demon was terrified and started to sweat all over. Don't do that. You're my prisoner now. Do you think you're in any position to object?" Invisible Demon had nothing to reply to with. Han Xiao stopped teasing him and knocked him unconscious, then injected a strong anesthetic, tied him up, and threw him aside. There was a reward from the dark net for Invisible Demon, and Han Xiao planned to take on the mission then turn in Invisible Demon alive, completing the mission immediately and maximizing the profit. Han Xiao had shown an overwhelming level of strength through this conflict, so Alumira did not dare do anything to him at all. Although he had the absolute upper hand in terms of strength, he still chose to stay, which reduced his suspicion with many factions. Also, Han Xiao was in a position where Alumira could not do anything to him, as Alumira was not willing to start another conflict with him. This whole framing conspiracy was to spark conflict between Han Xiao and Alumira, which had already almost completely failed. At least, Alumira did not dare turn against Han Xiao to his face. But this was not enough. The person responsible for the framing had yet to be found. Han Xiao guessed that there were two possibilities, one being that the person had given up and decided to continue hiding, the other being that person was still trying to save the plan or even attack Han Xiao. However, the possibility of the latter was not high since Han Xiao had already proven that he was not to be messed with. The home faction kept a low profile since Lagos died. Todd did not have any hatred at all, and he was more concerned about what benefit he could get at the moment. Other than ordering people to investigate for clues of Daryl's assassination, he also actively contacted the other factions to earn support for the election of a leader successor. Delo's son had the highest chance of becoming the next leader after Daryl died, but Han Xiao had killed him, and now the successor's position had become vacant. All the factions were ambitious and planned to seize power. Thus, a heavy storm was about to arrive. Everyone seemed like they were focused on the truth of Delo's death, but they were secretly more concerned about the election of the next leader. However, before the killer was discovered, the election would not take place. Han Xiao was one of the main parties in this, but he was also an excluded outsider. However, he did not mind it at all. He stayed in the room and gathered information about Alumira through Darknet's intelligence network and the Bamboo Rain Guild. A few days after, Xiao Jin came knocking on his door. He told Han Xiao that he had found an important clue. Through checking the guard's verbal information and comparing it with the recording from the surveillance cameras, I have found some traces. On the night of the assassination, an assistant of one of the northern faction's high-ranked officials left his house and disappeared for 27 minutes. This high-ranked official of the northern faction is called Sudinghua, 45 years of age, a northern continent local, always kept a low profile. Actually, I have been paying attention to him for a very long time. A spy I sent into the northern faction discovered that Sudinghua has secret connections with Raylan, and his assistant only changed a few years ago, the same year that he started to contact Raylan. Many high-ranked officials contacted other organizations discreetly, but all for their own benefits. However, Raylan had obviously turned Sudinghua into a traitor. Xiao Jin brought along quite a number of documents, which all clearly lead to Sudinghua. Han Xiao gave it careful thought. Alumira was Theseus's partner, and weakening Alumira meant weakening Theseus. To create a strong opponent for Alumira and spark internal conflict, Raylan would benefit from it as a third party, which was indeed a logical motive for Raylan. The northern faction was the most inconspicuous, so they would be the most suitable party for any conspiracy. Were the other factions able to get this information, too? Han Xiao raised the documents in his hands. Not sure. Xiao Jin shook his head. I acquired the information of Sudinghua secretly working with Raylan by accident, so the other factions probably don't know about it. Then why did you come to me? Han Xiao asked. Raylan might have planted quite few strong people around Sudinghua. I was hoping you could help us capture Sudinghua and his co-conspirators, and this is a good opportunity for you to get rid of the suspicion as well. I was thinking you would want to do it yourself, Xiao Jin said with a sincere tone. Rewards will not be a problem if you want them. Han Xiao stared at Xiao Jin for quite some time and smiled suddenly. I will help you this time, at market rate. Okay. Xiao Jin nodded. At night, Han Xiao started to act. Since he already exposed Viper, he wore it this time as well, but without the heavy mechanical arm a stealth operation did not require such a rough weapon. Sudinghua's mansion was located in a rural area. Han Xiao took out his laptop and hacked into the local network to freeze the surveillance cameras. Then he avoided the guards and jumped over the wall into the mansion. Sudinghua was a high-ranked official who had a rather low position compared to others. His guarding power in the mansion was weak, and with Han Xiao's level and strength, sneaking in was a piece of cake. When he quietly entered the study, the light was on. Han Xiao stood against the wall and scanned the room with magnetic scanning. There was no one in the room. Han Xiao entered the room without making a sound. He looked through the room and realized that the building was made of normal brick and wood. It did not have any special metal that could prevent any detection device, and the structure of the room was clear and simple. There's a hidden safe behind a painting on the wall beside the table. Han Xiao's eyes twinkled. Just as he was going to flip open the painting to open the safe, he realized something and stopped. He carefully looked around the room, then left the safe alone and came to the table instead. He tried opening the drawers, but they were all locked. However, that was not a problem for him. As a mechanic who could build firearms and robots, it would be a shame if he could not even open a lock. Furthermore, Han Xiao was already experienced in lock-picking. The drawers were filled with paper documents, mostly Alumira's internal information. There were some reports too. He dug through for a while and realized that they were all irrelevant documents. However, he found a slip of paper with a string of numbers written on it, which seemed like the passcode for the safe, and a small metal key that also looked like it was for the safe. Way too obvious. Han Xiao shook his head. He closed the drawer and did not use the key to open the safe. Hiding a safe behind a painting was too common. The key and passcode left in the drawer felt like it was done purposely. It looked like a trap. There was a very high chance that the safe was either bait or a trap, which would trigger some sort of alarm, as one would usually remember the passcode to the safe instead of writing it down. It could have been an incorrect assumption, but Han Xiao was just there to capture Su Dinghua. The safe could be opened any time after he captured him. Han Xiao walked toward the living room. He heard a few guards that were chatting with each other, and after a strategic scan and a vital sign comparison, he noticed that these people were all around LV-20, which meant that they were not normal guards. They could be superhumans, and if they were not, it meant that they were normal people but very elite. Seems like it was right. Han Xiao nodded. Su Dinghua's guards hid their true strength, so there was definitely something suspicious going on. Han Xiao turned and went upstairs to the bedroom. Su Dinghua was resting, so Han Xiao went in straight away and shot a paralyzing bullet at Su Dinghua, making him unconscious before he could scream, then tied him up with the blanket. There were 8 guards in the mansion along with Su Dinghua's assistant. Han Xiao was not planning to let any of them escape. Returning to the living room, Han Xiao did not hide anymore. He broke through the door and entered. Who? The guards pulled out their guns immediately. However, with the mechanical suit, these 4 unprepared guards were defeated within seconds. The commotion attracted attention. The radar detected other guards were coming quickly. Han Xiao broke through the wall with a loud bang and knocked out those guards one after another. Su Dinghua's assistant was hiding the most. He was at around LV-40. However, he still could not last for more than 10 seconds before Han Xiao broke his arms and legs and knocked him onto the ground. The difference in strength was too vast, an easy victory for Han Xiao. Han Xiao's destruction power was like a demolition. The whole mansion turned into ruins, and the loud noise could be heard from very far away. Xiao Jin was on standby right outside the mansion. He broke in as soon as he saw that Han Xiao had succeeded. Su Dinghua and his guards were all in the yard, and no one escaped. Han Xiao stayed and stood to the side. Xiao Jin did not avoid Han Xiao and started the interrogation in the yard. He poured water on Su Dinghua and the others to wake them up. Su Dinghua knew that he had been exposed when he woke up. How did you know? Su Dinghua was shocked and confused. I've known you were in contact Raylan for a very long time, Xiao Jin said coldly. You have changed your guards over the last few years. They are all strangers and sent by Raylan. You thought this was an opportunity when Black Phantom visited out of the blue and carried out the assassination, thinking that you did it very discreetly and destroyed many traces. Still, some clues were left behind. Chapter 211, The Real Killer, 6. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. You bribed Miri to bring Black Phantom to the scene as soon as the assassination was discovered, wanting to spark a conflict so that the scrimmage would bury more clues. You also arranged people to kill Miri during the battle. Xiao Jin listed many pieces of evidence. Su Dinghua closed his eyes in pain and softly spoke to himself. I knew this day would come. Being found out means death. Then, Su Dinghua looked at his assistant and said, I did kill our leader, but I'm not the mastermind he is. Raylan gave me many benefits and promised me even more, so I did things for them. He's a spy sent by Raylan to monitor and control me. This plan was also suggested by him. The assistant looked at Su Dinghua in anger and said, You've lost your mind. You think there's a way to get away alive? Su Dinghua stopped him and said, I did things for you people because of the benefits you gave, which won't be of use to me anymore. Now that I'm exposed, Raylan won't have an easy time either. The assistant's eyes suddenly turned white. His lips became purple, and white foam came out of his mouth. He died while twitching. When Su Dinghua was talking, he knew that he would definitely die, so he crunched down on the poisonous capsule between his teeth and committed suicide. The guards all followed his lead. The people of Raylan were known for being cold-blooded and loyal, so no one was surprised. Han Xiao stood aside and watched with no intent to stop them. Very soon, Su Dinghua was the only one left alive. Xiao Hai sneered and said, "It's too late to save yourself. I'm not planning to. I know that death is my only option." Su Dinghua shook his head. Xiao Jin cut in and said, "Su Dinghua, you have been a member of Alumara for a very long time. The leader treated you well, so why did you do it?" Ha 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 ha. Su Dinghua suddenly laughed so loudly that even tears came out of his eyes. He said with a mocking tone, "Xiao the second chair, this doesn't seem like something you would say. Your blood is much colder than mine." Xiao Jin remained expressionless and was not affected by it, but Xiao Hai slapped Su Dinghua and said, "Seems like you want a slow death. The people from other factions have arrived for quite some time." They watched the scene in shock and confusion. Su Dinghua laughed for a while, then suddenly said with sorrow, "I will apologize to the leader myself." Xiao Hai took out a whole set of torture devices and said coldly, "Then you have a lot of time to think about what to say." "Enough, he has already confessed." "Bring him back then interrogate him," one of the chieftains of the northern faction said. Su Dinghua was a high-ranked official of the northern faction, so interrogating and torturing him in public would bring a lot of shame to the northern faction. Su Dinghua was a traitor who did not represent the northern faction's position, but it did bring them shame. Xiao Jin looked at Han Xiao with inquiry in his eyes. The others looked over as well. Black Phantom was the one that had been framed, so his opinion was very important. "The real killer has been found. Anything other than that has nothing to do with me," Han Xiao said. He then turned away and left. The real killer that assassinated Delil had been found. The whole plan had been Raylan's, and Han Xiao was cleared of suspicion. Su Dinghua died in the interrogation. He spat out quite an amount of intelligence before he died. He was a very important chess piece to Raylan, and the assassination was to spark conflict between Alumara and Darknet, but the plan had gone south. Han Xiao's strength was far beyond their expectations. They had thought that Black Phantom would be captured or even killed, so the hatred between Alumara and Darknet could not be resolved easily, but to their surprise, Han Xiao had the upper hand. The assassination only went so well because of Su Dinghua's years of planning. Raylan suffered a huge loss when he died. Xiao Jin was a huge contributor to finding the real killer. He gained a large amount of prestige, and the home faction had to thank him even if they did not want to. Everything was settled. However, Black Phantom, who had cleared his suspicion, decided to stay. No one knew what motives he had. The factions did not have time to care about him since they were all busy with the election of a successor. In the room, Han Xiao looked at the mission The Real Killer on his interface. Su Dinghua had been caught, but he did not turn in the mission. This thing has yet to end. A flash of coldness appeared in Han Xiao's eyes, one thought had become clearer in his mind. 3 days after capturing Su Dinghua, Xiao Jin brought Xiao Hai along and came to visit. "Why are you looking for me?" Han Xiao asked. "I should be the one asking. What's your goal in staying here?" Xiao Jin asked back. "I was framed out of nowhere, and your people wanted to kill me. I need compensation." Xiao Hai was shocked and angry. "This whole thing was planned by Raylan, and you even killed our people. How dare you ask for compensation? Raylan is too far away, so I'm getting money from you guys first. You're robbing us." Xiao Hai was filled with anger. "That's correct." Han Xiao nodded calmly. He looked at Xiao Hai mockingly and said, "What can you do about that?" Xiao Jin pulled the furious Xiao Hai back, then wrote a number on a piece of paper and said, "I will compensate you personally. Is this amount enough?" Han Xiao gave it a quick look and said, "Barely acceptable." Xiao Hai was frustrated. He did not understand why Xiao Jin was willing to pay, there was absolutely no need to in his eyes. "There's another reason for you to have come to find me, right?" Han Xiao crossed his legs. "Indeed, I have something to ask your help for. Delo is dead, and the leader position is now vacant. Alumara is a large family, so there needs to be a leader. In 2 days' time, an internal election will be carried out in a vote from the high-ranked officials. Todd from the Home faction, S.E. Qi from the Red Island faction, and Angleton from the Northern faction are all strong competitors. When I was focused on investigating Delo's death, they were already approaching the high-ranked officials and drawing votes. I'm now at a disadvantage, so I hope you can help me, Xiao Jin said in seriousness. Why should I help you? For the sake of me helping you clear your suspicion, please help me. I need a reward, Han Xiao said coldly. How ungrateful. If it wasn't for father, you would still be the biggest suspect. Don't push your luck. Xiao Hai could not take it and yelled in anger. Han Xiao looked at him and said calmly, you should be grateful for me not killing you, or you would all be corpses. Xiao Hai's expression turned twisted and furious. He trembled in anger because of Han Xiao's attitude. He could only look at Xiao Jin, hoping that his father would do him justice. However, he was bound to be disappointed. Xiao Jin had remained calm all along. How much do you want? Han Xiao touched his chin, pointed at the piece of paper, and said, 3 times this. Maniac, Xiao Hai was stunned. This request was outrageous. However, Xiao Jin accepted the terms without hesitation and said, no problem. Father. Xiao Hai yelled in disbelief. He could not understand why Xiao Jin kept listening to Han Xiao. It's no use getting help from him. Outsiders cannot interfere with internal elections. He has no position in the internal meeting no matter how strong he is. Xiao Hai said hastily. I have a way, Xiao Jin replied coldly. Mr. Black Phantom, are you willing to join us Xiao faction? Join the Xiao faction? What does that mean? Han Xiao raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, what do you mean? Join my family with the same seniority in the family as me. My children will be your stepchildren. The atmosphere suddenly turned weird. Xiao Hai almost staggered and fell. He was completely shocked. Xiao Jin had never discussed this with him, and now suddenly he's going to have a stepfather? Damn, you can do that. Han Xiao's eyes twitched. Xiao Jin's level of shameless exceeded his expectations. Would such a childish method work? Politics has always been childish, Xiao Jin replied coldly. As long as you join the Xiao faction, you can attend internal meetings. Your strength will signify your power, and as long as you appear, it will represent a threat. However, you will be a part of the Xiao faction by then, which means you're not an exterior threat. The other factions will give up automatically in fear. The meaning of a family member and an outsider showcasing strength was different. One was an exterior threat and would only attract displeasure, but if it was a family member, it would mean that Xiao Jin's power had grown tremendously and that he had earned a strong ally for Alumara in the big picture. It would mean a huge contribution for the family. Given the power that Xiao Jin had gathered through the years and the recent prestige that he earned by finding the real killer that assassinated Daryl, the other factions would wisely give up. Up till now, Han Xiao had already gotten a basic guess of the entire situation. He smiled and said, I see no benefits in joining the Xiao faction, why should I do it? You join the Xiao faction, and when I become the leader of the family, Alumara will become your ally. Seems like you're willing to pay everything to become the leader. Han Xiao laughed. He then said teasingly, okay, I will join the Xiao faction and reluctantly become the stepfather of your children. Xiao Hai was so angry that he was losing his mind. He had to give Han Xiao benefits just to become his stepson. He had never been in such a shameful situation before, and the part that angered him most was that Xiao Jin had actually agreed. He began to suspect that his father had been brainwashed. Han Xiao looked at Xiao Hai and smiled mockingly. Come, let me hear you call me stepfather. Xiao Hai's face turned green. He was an arrogant person, so this was a fate worse than death. However, he saw Xiao Jin's strict face, then suppressed his anger with all his might and forced the words out through gritted teeth. Stepfather. Han Xiao dug his ears and teased, I didn't hear that clearly. Stepfather. Xiao Hai yelled. He used so much strength that blood came out of his teeth, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. Hee, good boy. Han Xiao could not control his laughter in his heart. His body's origin was Xiao Hai's younger brother. What would Xiao Hai think if he knew the truth? Xiao Jin reached out his hand and said, I look forward to working with you. Han Xiao accepted the handshake. The father and son of the Xiao family stood up and left, neither of them saying a word as they did so. After returning to Xiao faction's mansion, Xiao Hai could not hold back his questions. Father, why did you do this? Xiao Jin replied without an expression on his face, Black Phantom is greedier than I imagined. I thought that clearing his suspicion could make him grateful, but I didn't expect to spend so much for him to join us. Anyway, it's worth it. At least we are the only faction that could approach Black Phantom and get his help. When I become the leader, these losses can be made up with ease. I see, when you become the leader, you won't have to care about Black Phantom anymore, Xiao Hai realized. Xiao Jin suddenly turned to look at his son and said with a strict voice, "You're wrong. There's even more need to fulfill Black Phantom's terms after I become the leader. It's suicide to kick someone to the curb when they've outlived their usefulness. This is a world where the strong live, and the weak feed. Black Phantom is standing at the peak with his strength, his personal strength is as threatening as an organization. As long as Black Phantom is part of the Xiao faction on the books, we can rely on him, and the other factions won't dare step out of line move. I know that you don't accept this deep down in your heart, but don't act on your impulses and ruin my plan." Xiao Hai had objections in his heart, but he could only clench his teeth and accept it. "Yes, father." Chapter 212, The New Succession. The factions were all making moves in the dark. Xiao Jin had given Han Xiao the information of the other factions' movements over the next 2 days, and he wired the agreed compensation and reward into Han Xiao's darknet account, a total of 8 million aquamarine dollars. Han Xiao had a huge amount of money, a total of more than $40 million, more than 10 times what he used to have. With such a large sum, he could splurge freely on machinery and carry out some of his ideas, such as the robot army style that he once thought to be too expensive. 2 days passed in a blink of an eye. The internal meeting was carried out in the Alumera meeting hall as scheduled. High-ranked officials across all the factions gathered within, and the guarding power was high. Han Xiao wore a hood and disguised himself as an ordinary high-ranked official of the Xiao faction. He entered the meeting hall without attracting attention and sat down. In the heart of the meeting hall was a circular-shaped table. The leaders of various factions sat around the table, and the other high-ranked officials sat on the more exterior seats. Those belonging to a faction sat behind their leaders. The factions were separated distinctively, forming smaller areas at different angles. It was snowing lightly outside, but the meeting hall was warm thanks to the air conditioner. The people took off their coats and started talking among themselves. It soon became rather noisy. Dang, dang. Todd rang the bell on the table, and the meeting hall turned silent quickly. "The meeting will now commence," Todd said with a serious expression. "There are 4 candidates for the successor for the leader, myself, Xiao the second chair, Qi the third chair, and Mr. Angleton. Start voting when you're ready." "I would like to say a few words before the vote starts," Angleton said as he stood up and started his speech. It was a standard procedure to do a speech before the vote. Although the seated high-ranked officials already had a basic idea of who they were going to vote for, this step was still not to be omitted. Very soon, the 4 candidates finished their speeches. Todd looked around the table and said, "The voting shall begin." The high-ranked officials spoke their choice. Todd was nervous. He had been contacting other high-ranked officials over the past few days and promised them many benefits. They had all agreed to vote for him when they had the discussion, so he could easily beat the other candidates in the number of votes. But soon he became stunned. The high-ranked officials who promised to vote for him all voted for Qi without even looking at Todd. How did this happen? Todd was shocked and angry. Qi had a bright smile on his face. He smiled at every high-ranked official who voted for him. Watching his vote count becoming impossible to be beaten, his heart was relieved. As soon as Delo was assassinated, Qi had realized that the successor election was an opportunity. He had been in communication with Theseus secretly, and they had agreed to help him for the promotion, and he, in turn, promised many benefits to them if he successfully became the leader. Although Alumera was Theseus's partner, Theseus was very aggressive. They had been secretly wanting to control Alumera from the inside, and they had gotten into contact with Qi the third chair, who was not satisfied with his position. Theseus made use of their relationship network and discreetly drew in many high-ranked officials to give Qi an advantage. And for Angleton from the northern faction, he was basically there to watch the show. In the end, nobody from the northern faction voted for him except for a very few. He sat in his seat with awkwardness on his face. Angleton had been elected by the northern faction to just be a representative. He did not want to give up on fighting for the leader's position, but he knew that he did not have a chance. Thus, he had mixed feelings about the matter. Qi's vote count was way ahead, and soon, it exceeded the half mark. The election was settled. Haha, thank you everyone for your support and love. I shall not disappoint. Qi stood up full of happiness on his face. He could not hide his satisfaction at all. This time, Xiao Jin spoke. Wait. Everyone looked over immediately with various looks on their faces. Xiao Jin was a powerful candidate as well, but he had not done anything up till now. They were very curious about what he was planning. Xiao the second chair, do you have any problem? Qi's heart skipped a beat, and he emphasized the word second chair. Suddenly, a voice that was unforgettable to the seated high-ranked officials came out of the Xiao faction area. I have a problem. Everyone's eyes widened, and their expressions turned into horror. They recognized that this was Black Phantom's voice. Xiao faction's members spit open and showed Han Xiao, who was hidden. Han Xiao was wearing the same black windbreaker and black gloves. His arms were crossed, and he said expressionlessly, Xiao Jin is more suitable to be the leader. Qi was stunned for an extended moment till he regained his focus. Xiao Jin, how dare you let an outsider interfere with our family issues? Are you intentionally breaking the rules? Black Phantom is not an outsider, he is a senior of my Xiao faction. He is the stepfather of my children. As soon as Xiao Jin finished his sentence, the youngsters of Xiao faction all bowed toward Han Xiao and yelled stepfather simultaneously, almost as if they had been practicing it. The others were stunned in shock. How shameless! Todd's face was twitching. According to Black Phantom's previous actions, his stand was above all, and he did not care about Alumira's internal changes at all, but now, he was suddenly interfering. They gave it a thought and realized that, when Black Phantom was suspected, Xiao Jin was the only one that spoke for him, and it was Xiao Jin who discovered the real killer in the end, which cleared Black Phantom's name. However, during that time, the other factions were all focused on drawing votes from the high-ranked officials. Then it occurred to all the factions that Xiao Jin might have gotten in touch with Black Phantom only because of this, which was why Black Phantom was willing to help Xiao Jin. Also, Xiao Jin had definitely paid a huge price to attract Black Phantom into having diplomatic relations with the Xiao faction. Although the other factions were not happy, they could not deny the fact that Xiao Jin had increased Alumira's overall strength by doing this, as this meant that Black Phantom had become an ally of Alumira. Han Xiao sat down casually and scanned the entire place with a dangerous look. The high-ranked officials all turned away and did not dare look him in the eyes. Words were not needed, Han Xiao's intentions were clear just by sitting here. A silent threat. The atmosphere got awkward. The high-ranked officials who had already voted became anxious and exchanged looks secretly. Finally, a high-ranked official could not take it anymore. He wiped his sweat and said hesitantly, I've thought carefully and feel that Xiao Jin is more suitable as the next leader. Can I change my vote? Changing the vote was not allowed according to the rules. However, the host of the meeting, Todd, was cursing in his mind. Black Phantom was right in front of them, so he did not dare to say no. Thus, he nodded in dismay. After the first, the second, and the third followed, and soon came the rest. Han Xiao scanned around the room. Whoever came into his sights immediately changed their vote. It was like his eyes had magic in them. Qi did not admit defeat yet. He wanted to have a final struggle but realized that Han Xiao had looked over with eyes that were so sharp that they pierced right through his heart. Horror filled his mind, and he closed his mouth in fear, watching the position that had belonged to him moments ago slip through his fingers. The result was a definite Xiao Jin won with an overwhelming number of votes. The people of the Xiao faction were smiling brightly while the others had to suck it up and congratulate Xiao Jin one after another. The Xiao faction's ways had the other factions feeling very uncomfortable, but the result was not unacceptable. After all, Xiao Jin was a very senior member of the family and had made a lot of contributions. Who knew that Xiao Jin would win in the end? Todd's heart was bleeding. The home faction had controlled Alumira for all these years, and now, they had lost their power all of a sudden. Todd knew that from that day onward, the home faction would slowly become a vassal. Seeing that things were settled, Han Xiao left. The crowd split open automatically, and the high-ranked officials who were congratulating Xiao Jin also stopped to look at Han Xiao as he left. Although Xiao Jin was the final winner, in the eyes of everyone else, the center of this meeting was Black Phantom. All he did was show up, and it decided Xiao Jin's position. This was the power of overwhelming strength. The people were all very jealous of Xiao Jin. As long as Black Phantom remained in the Xiao faction, Xiao Jin's position would be forever stable. Chapter 213, The Fight Between the Sandpiper and the Clam. The structure of Alumara changed. Xiao Jin became the leader, and the other factions all congratulated him. The power to make a lot of important decisions has been moved from the home faction to the Xiao faction. At night, Xiao Jin invited Han Xiao to his mansion. All the high-ranked officials of the Xiao faction gathered around. Xiao Hai and the other children were there, too. They bowed to Han Xiao and called him stepfather when they saw him. No matter what these youngsters of the Xiao family thought in their heart, they had no choice but to maintain respect for Han Xiao on the surface. The butler led Han Xiao to the book room and closed the door, leaving Xiao Jin and Han Xiao alone in the room. Xiao Jin's wish had been granted, and he had become the leader. Although he was still expressionless, one could tell he was happy and satisfied from the feeling he gave off. He did not forget the benefits that Han Xiao had given him, and because Han Xiao said that he was leaving the next day, Xiao Jin dropped everything else and invited Han Xiao over to express his appreciation on the first day of becoming the leader. "I really appreciate your help," Xiao Jin said sincerely. Han Xiao did not sit down. He stood in front of the bookshelf, played around with the small items in the drawer, and said casually, "Get to the point." Xiao Jin took out a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. He then walked to Han Xiao and handed 1 glass over. "Our agreement remains unchanged. If there's anything you need me for, I'll provide help." Xiao Jin smiled. His tone was more confident now that he was the leader. The wine was amber and fragrant, its taste was smooth and soft. This was Xiao Jin's very high-quality collection that he treasured. It would only be opened for extremely important guests, and it had been stored for many years before that day. Han Xiao took the wine glass but did not drink it. He just swirled the glass around and said coldly, "I've been thinking recently and have come up with a very interesting theory. You knew Sidinghua was going to assassinate Daryl a long time ago, but you didn't tell anyone and let it happen because there would only be a chance to become the leader after Daryl died. Then, when everyone was suspecting me, only you insisted to help me because you knew who the killer was, and it was a good opportunity to gain my favor. Later, when other factions had already established a bad relationship with me, you found an opportunity to throw out Sidinghua as a clue and became the one who found the real killer, largely increasing your prestige while simultaneously starting good relations with me. You used that as a reason to gain my help to win the leader's election by using my strength to overpower all the other factions. You're not the real killer, but you're an opportunist who acted while riding along the waves and harvesting the final fruit of victory." Han Xiao turned his head and looked at Xiao Jin. "What do you think about this theory?" Xiao Jin shook his head in laughter. He sipped the wine and said, "It's interesting, but it's not true." "I think it's true." Han Xiao's expression resembled a smile, yet it was not a smile. Xiao Jin's expression changed slightly and said, "That's just your speculation." Han Xiao walked towards Xiao Jin. His body was leaning forward, and the pressure forced Xiao Jin to step back continuously until he hit the table. They stood extremely close. Xiao Jin could only look at Han Xiao in his eyes because he had nowhere else to look. He felt a cold murderous intent in Han Xiao's eyes, and cold sweat started dripping. "I don't need evidence. If I think it's true, then it is," Han Xiao sneered. Xiao Jin had to tighten his facial muscles to control his expressions, and his heart began to sink. "Remember, whatever you borrowed from me, I can take it back anytime." Han Xiao's fingers pressed 2 times on Xiao Jin's chest strongly. The act was provoking. Xiao Jin had been promoted with the help of Black Phantom, and Han Xiao could do the same thing for the others anytime. Xiao Jin had no doubt that the other factions would be willing to spend a huge sum to make Black Phantom their ally. With Black Phantom's strength, he could even duplicate the assassination. If their relationship turned bad, there was no way Xiao Jin could protect himself against a legendary killer every single day and night. Xiao Jin understood what Han Xiao meant: threaten, intimidation, and blackmail. Black Phantom was more fearsome than he had expected. This partnership with Black Phantom was catching a tiger by its tail. The atmosphere became more and more intense, and when Xiao Jin was almost suffocating, Han Xiao took a few steps back to ease the atmosphere. He played around with the wine glass and said coldly, "What are you going to do with Raylan?" Xiao Jin sighed. He knew that this was the time for him to show his stance. "I will make them pay. I'll pursue and kill all of their intelligence agents, attack the organizations they support, and destroy their bases in the wilderness." Originally, it was not suitable to start a war right after he became the leader. His original plan had been to stabilize the internals in 6 months. However, Han Xiao's threatening made him understand that he had no choice. He could only listen to Han Xiao and retaliate against Raylan immediately. Alumra's damage was not in his consideration anymore, he had to listen to Han Xiao no matter how much heartache he felt. Very good. Han Xiao gave a faint laugh, then left and said, "Enjoy your time as the leader." The wine glass was placed on the table. Han Xiao did not drink any from the start to the end. The sounds of the youngsters yelling "stepfather" outside the door grew faint and distant. Xiao Jin only sat down after the sound disappeared. The happiness of becoming the leader became weaker because of Han Xiao's threats. "He's got my weakness." Xiao Jin laughed in bitterness and called Xiao Hai in. "Father," Black Phantom left. Xiao Hai could not hide his happiness. The position of leader finally belonged to the Xiao faction. "Pass my order down. The out-of-town divisions will be launching a full attack on Raylan's forces in the wilderness." Xiao Jin was back to expressionless. Xiao Hai's smile froze. Waves of shock filled his heart, and he said in disbelief, "Father, you've just become the leader, and the structure has yet to stabilize. If we start a war at this time, the power of the family will be hugely damaged, and our position will be even more volatile. The priority right now should be to stabilize the internal matters. Although Raylan set us up this time, there's no need to seek revenge immediately. There are many more days to come, and there's no benefit to what you're doing. Stop talking, do as I said," Xiao Jin said coldly. Xiao Hai was stunned. "You have unlocked the Alumra family. Current relationship, respect, 3000/6000, partner of Xiao faction. The starting relationship is respect." Seems like Xiao Jin gave in. Han Xiao was very satisfied. He did not threaten Xiao Jin out of nowhere. The deduction earlier was made from his speculation through the pieces of evidence. Firstly, Xiao Jin's actions were all very goal-oriented and connected with each other, and these actions all brought him a benefit, which was very suspicious. Secondly, the real killer was a puzzle mission, but Xiao Jin found Sidinghua straight away. Thus, the mission had been completed too easily, which made him feel that Xiao Jin knew who the killer was all along. If Xiao Jin knew that Sidinghua was going to assassinate Daryl from the start and did not do anything about it, then the character that Xiao Jin played was neither the real killer nor the mastermind, but someone who waited for the opportunity to take on the position of the leader. Han Xiao had already thought of this when Xiao Jin came to look for his help, and he had planned this back then when he agreed to help. He acted like he did not know and let Xiao Jin use him to increase his rank, but at the same time, Xiao Jin had to rely on him to do so. Therefore, Han Xiao turned around and threatened Xiao Jin because, unless Xiao Jin wanted to give up his position as the leader, he had to listen to him and almost become his puppet. From Xiao Jin's actions, he was an ambitious guy who knew how to analyze his situation. The chance of him compromising was more than 80%. He definitely could not let go of the leader's position that he had worked so hard to get. Furthermore, Raylan was the mastermind who framed him, and there was no way Han Xiao was going to let them have an easy time. Therefore, he had ordered Alumra to clash with them without considering the costs for them. The people of Raylan would definitely not expect Alumra to counterattack so strongly. It went the exact opposite way that they wanted it to go, and they had brought fire to themselves. This way, Han Xiao could take revenge on Raylan without getting blood on his blades, and he did not even have to do anything. It was easier to fight a large organization with a large organization. During what happened in Alumra, Han Xiao had been watching like a bystander and only showed his teeth in the end. The fight between a sandpiper and a clam benefited the fisherman in the end. Of course, there was a possibility that his guess was wrong. Xiao Jin might not actually have been someone who knew all along and acted on the opportunities that surfaced. However, this was not important at all. It was as he had said before. I don't need evidence. If I think it's true, then it is. It must be. Xiao Jin did not have a choice. I should complete the mission. Han Xiao opened the interface. Please state the real killer's identity. Sidinghua, Raylan, Han Xiao described the situation. The mission requirement was to find out the mastermind who framed him, which was Raylan without a doubt. The real killer has been processed. Determining. Requirements met. Mission complete. You have received a chance to learn a random ability or talent. Please select. Han Xiao pondered for a moment. He felt that a talent would be better. There was a chance to get a rare talent or even a molding ability. Talent. Randomizing. Completed. Please choose from one of the three below. Duplicate channeling, 2%, 8% chance of duplicating the ability during channeling. Triggering the ability depends on luck. Call of the Wild, increases default affinity with beast-type monsters with a chance to communicate. Charisma increases the chance of communication. Frost resistance, plus 35% resistance to ice element and makes it harder to receive debuffs from ice elements such as slow or frozen. Chapter 214, Leaving. Between these three random talents, the one with the highest practicality on the surface should be frost resistance, which had a very specific effect. However, in terms of usefulness, Han Xiao felt that Call of the Wild had a broader area of application. Beast-type monsters were a very large monster group. Other than planets that had been highly modified or had very little life, every planet across the entire galaxy would have some beasts. Beasts were a very important part of the biological chain, and there were many types of beasts living across land and sea. There were even some stronger beast species that lived in space, unharmed by the radiation, meteoroids, and many other forms of danger existing in space. These types of species were all bosses that would appear in later versions of the game. As for duplicate channeling, it was a sorcerer talent. It did not apply to any ability other than magic, so it was completely useless for Han Xiao, who was a mechanic. If it was not for the random factor, Han Xiao would have never gotten in touch with any talents from another class. After some consideration, Han Xiao decided on Call of the Wild. Although his charm was a little low, it was still a rather useful talent. Planet Aquamarine in version 2.0 would be filled with monsters, beasts would be crawling across the planet. Han Xiao had a feeling that Call of the Wild would be useful by then. His plan was to leave Planet Aquamarine before version 1.0 ended, but he had a thought in his mind. The main storyline of version 2.0 was Mutation Disaster. It was a virus that came from space and caused mutations in many planets, including Planet Aquamarine. The cure was later invented by a higher civilization. Han Xiao was thinking that he could return with the cure in the future and bring an end to the storyline earlier. After he spread intelligence of the Germinal organization before the game's official release, Han Xiao knew that there were a lot of benefits to bringing large impacts to the main storyline. This was just a blueprint of the future. Han Xiao was still focusing on the current issues. The accident in Alumera had come to an end, and the result was satisfactory. Not only did he not lose anything, he also gained quite a number of benefits. Although his schedule was delayed because of the days that he stayed in Alumera, no one disliked having more side missions. The more side missions there were, the more benefits they would bring. The players would always be there, and they were not complaining or anything, so there was no rush for Han Xiao. The next morning, Han Xiao left Alumera. All the high-ranked officials came to see him off. The cold of the north seemed to have pierced into the hearts of Alumera's high-ranked officials. They held on tightly to their beast hide coats. Black Phantom had become a member of their family on the books, so this outsider was now the strongest in the family. The high-ranked officials were willing to suck up to him, and they gifted him an SUV to save him the trouble of walking. Everyone in the Xiao faction arrived. They all greeted Han Xiao with manners and respect, displaying their closeness by having their youngsters calling Black Phantom stepfather one after another. The other factions despised this yet were jealous of it. If they could get Black Phantom's support, they would do the same willingly. They sighed in their hearts that Xiao Jin had grabbed the opportunity before them. Xiao Jin was having mixed emotions. He looked Han Xiao in the eye and nodded lightly. Only they themselves knew the deals that they made behind everyone else's back. Although Xiao Jin's wish came true, he could not help but feel some bitterness deep in his heart. Han Xiao waved as he got into the SUV and left in the wind and snow. He finally left. The tensed bodies of Alumera's high-ranked officials all relaxed. It was like a huge stone had been removed from their heart, and even breathing felt easier. Not far away, the players of the Bamboo Rain Guild cheered with joy. Their mission was finally completed. Black Phantom captured the real killer and brought a huge impact to Alumera's structure. As his helper, you witnessed the entire process. Bonus reward, 15,000 experience. The experience from this mission was a lot for the players at the time, so they were very satisfied. By the way, Xian, didn't you make a recording of Black Phantom? Guild leader Bamboo Rain Fragrance asked. Bamboo Rain Xian said with pride, I've already sold it and emailed it to Galaxy Times. They have given me a reward. The mechanical suit, men's romance. The background of Galaxy had players guessing about all sorts of combat system, and the mechanical suit was a very popular topic among them. Articles about mechanical suits created countless fans, and many players looked forward the day of them battling in a mechanical suit. Between the 5 main classes, only the mechanic class fit the speculations, but since the official release, no one had seen an NPC that fought in a mechanical suit. Han Xiao was the first person who had showcased the mechanical suit, and he had created another first without noticing. The impact of this on the players would only show after the next episode of Galaxy Times was released, but before that, it first impacted the local organizations. When Han Xiao killed Luan and Vanessa, he had used his mechanical suit. It had been recorded by the people of Alumara and leaked into the dark net, which triggered waves of shock within the organizations. Everyone could see that Viper had an astonishing level of performance. It was a very advanced mechanical suit. Black Phantom was a mechanic, so this had undoubtedly been built by himself, possessing a higher quality than the military experiments of many large nations. Han Xiao was famous for his identity as a killer, but he had shocked the world again with his standard as a mechanic. The organizations immediately updated his documents. At the same time, there were also many organizations who were interested in obtaining this mechanical suit. One of them was the Germinal organization. This is a very advanced single-unit combat mechanical suit. If we can gain control of it, the strength of our soldiers will increase tremendously, and the chances of winning this war will be higher. In their headquarters in Andrea, the leader and Cyberlos were watching the short combat recording on a large screen. Cyberlos' eyes opened wide and were filled with fanaticism. The leader, on the other hand, thought of something else. The guy who claimed to be our member and made a mess in the Lewis Research Institution was wearing this mechanical suit, too. Turns out it was Black Phantom. During the evacuation in the northern continent some time ago, Black Phantom was involved as well, and he took us as an enemy. Not a guy to be easily messed with. The leader frowned. His mechanical suit is of high importance to us, but we don't have enough forces in the other continents, and his movements are difficult to predict. Unless we send the strongest executive officers of the organization, no one can fight him. The leader did not want to give up easily on Black Phantom's mechanical suit, but his senses told him that he would have no chance to deal with Black Phantom once the war started unless Black Phantom came to the battlefield. The leader shook his head. The chances of that were close to none. 2 days later, Han Xiao accepted the reward mission for Invisible Demon in one of Darknet's based of the northern continent and only handed Invisible Demon away after a notification popped up on the interface. Interestingly, the person in charge of the stronghold was very confused. "Mr. Black Phantom, where's the Invisible Demon who you've mentioned?" Han Xiao pointed at an empty space on the ground and said, "Right here." The person wiped off his cold sweat and said, I can't see him." Han Xiao used more than 10 torturous ways to prove Invisible Demon's existence, and after the heavily wounded and mind-broken Invisible Demon was retrieved, the mission was completed. More than 200,000 experience and 150,000 aquamarine dollars. He had made another fortune with Invisible Demon. Although Han Xiao had amassed a small fortune, he was not going to give up any opportunity to make more. It was an accumulation process. The players with the top spot on the level leaderboard had reached level 20 and were such on the class advancement missions, and at this time, Han Xiao had arrived in the last novice village of the novice village and made it in time for the last opportunity to make a huge amount of experience. Upon arrival, Han Xiao realized that he was even more popular, especially among the male players who all surrounded him. "What's the name of your mechanical suit? Do you sell the mechanical suit?" These questions appeared the most. Han Xiao browsed through the forum and noticed that Galaxy Times had released a recording of him battling in his mechanical suit. This episode of Galaxy Times was not as interesting, but this recording became the highlight of the episode. The quiet comments section exploded upon seeing the recording. No wonder the players are so excited. Han Xiao could understand. When he was a new player, if he had seen a mechanical suit, he would have reacted the same. The most direct influence was that players had even more of an interest in the mechanic class. More people came to this novice village to change their class, which in turn increased his sales. An official announcement showing the various statistics of the game would be released sometime after the official launch. Han Xiao was looking forward to seeing the percentage of players that chose the mechanic class. In his previous life, this percentage had been a single digit, but now, with his influence, he was expecting it to at least double. The more mechanic players, the brighter Han Xiao's business future was. Doo-doo. His phone suddenly rang. Han Xiao looked at his phone, and it was Hao Tian who sent a text message. He had completed the mission, and he was the first among all the other highly skilled players who had taken on the New Era Origin mission. Not bad, no wonder he's a god-tier pro. Hao Tian's eyes twinkled. Hao Tian had completed the mission before he had even left the northern continent, and the players who had accepted the mission much earlier in the western continent had yet to do so. Hao Tian accepted the mission ending of the survivor, whose the requirement was to retrieve Sully document 485. The text content was the entire process of Hao Tian completing the mission, and the information included in the document was included as well. Chapter 215, Flow of the Main Storyline. In the age of virtual gaming, interaction was very important. The players felt that Galaxy had done an exceptional job in that regard. The interaction with NPCs was very free, and players could casually write text messages, emails, and such sorts to communicate with NPCs from a far range. The popular games at the time all had a certain extent of reality and virtual socializing functionalities. There was an old but always popular game, Ruthless, that was very good in this regard. Text messages could be written freely even though it was a single-player game. When VR capsule technology was invented, Ruthless designed a version for it as well. At the time, due to the level of reality and the rough play style of Ruthless, a debate was triggered, and the NPC Protection Society that people had only talked about was actually really created. It was a very interesting phenomenon. Ending of the survivor completed. One of the 5 requirements in the hidden main storyline turned green, which represented its completion. You have received Sully document 485. From the document, you acknowledged a buried past. This mission has a commentator, damn. Han Xiao was surprised. The document recorded an old action plan, with a lot of information missing. Before the War of the Old Era, a country sent a team to a village in Andria for a secret mission. What happened afterward was unknown, but all the residents of the village were killed by gunfire. That country is already dead now. That's it? Han Xiao was confused. This description was a clue of the mission, but it was way too vague. He thought about it and sent it to Hans. That old guy had more information on Hans, maybe he could discover something more. Completing the mission was enough for Han Xiao. Hao Tian stood beside the mission character Old Devon and stared at his phone, waiting for Black Phantom's reply. This mission had been very cumbersome. Old Devon had the document, so he had needed to gain Old Devon's trust first, which he had done by completing many chore missions. The difficult part was that Old Devon suffered from mental illnesses. He had paranoia, amnesia, schizophrenia, was prone to anger, spoke nonsense, and dozens more. He would quickly become anxious, and he would mistake a trash can on the road for bomb and passers-by for enemies who were chasing him. Old Devon had been a member of this plan, and from what he said, after he completed the mission, the nation had killed his family and hunted him down. The hiding and stress he suffered through the years gave him the mental illnesses. Do you know why war broke out during the old era? Old Devon would always look around his surroundings and make sure that there was no one before he started chatting with Hao Tian. It was because of me. Every nation was looking for me, so they fought each other. Enemies were everywhere. They still have not given up. Look at these surveillance cameras in the city. They are all set up for me. Of course, Hao Tian did not understand a single word he said, and he did not care about the story anyway. He was just doing the missions, and with his high efficiency and strong will, he completed the mission. Hao Tian soon received Han Xiao's reply and the notification of the mission being completed, and a sense of relief washed over him. You're the first to complete the mission. I feel that you have quite the potential. Are you interested in helping me? Sure. Hao Tian gave a very simple reply. Wait at the border of Raylan, coordinate R1565.842. I will bring you along when I leave the northern continent. Sure. Although Hao Tian had a very steady personality, he still felt a sense of excitement when he thought of the benefits of Black Phantom's hidden storyline in the forums. Han Xiao finished his journey in making crazy amounts of profit when he left the last novice village in the northern continent. Before leaving the northern continent, Han Xiao came to an ice field where high-level ice bears lived. He spent a few hours and used the Ghost Sniper rifle to fulfill the requirements for Lethal Shot. Lethal Shot, 12 to 25% chance to activate true damage with the first shot on target. This cannot be reactivated on the same target within 5 minutes. By changing the target, the talent could be triggered multiple times, which was very useful. Although it did not quite meet the standards of Bennett's cheat-like molding ability legendary battle techniques, it was still a rare attacking talent. After counting, Han Xiao had 12 talents, which was exceptional in version 1.0. Half of that would already be very high for a LV55 player. Han Xiao also gave the recently obtained Call of the Wild talent a try. The ice bears above level 50 were not affected by it at all, they were still as aggressive as they had originally been. He lowered the level of his targets and realized that a bear cub was very friendly toward him. It was white, chubby, and furry, only as tall as his waist level. It hugged his leg and showed off its cuteness. There's quite some use to this talent. The cub is only at level 10 something, but there should be other hidden elements to the Call of the Wild. Other than it being affected by charm, the level difference between me and the beast should also be part of the reason as well as the characteristics of the beast. Han Xiao contemplated the matter. Suddenly, he saw this furry ball trying its best to climb up his leg. The great Han Xiao squinted and kicked the cub away. The white and chubby cub rolled over a few times and then came back again. Han Xiao just could not chase it away no matter how he tried, it was very clingy. Its furry butt kept shaking, and it looked stupid. Its small, black eyes were filled with innocence. Tisk, how adorable. Han Xiao could not resist its cuteness. He held the cub upside down and gave it a look. And it's a female. They looked at each other for some time, then Han Xiao reached out his arms. The cub climbed up laboriously to Han Xiao's shoulder and hung onto it like a swing. You definitely have some koala blood. Didn't expect you to be a crossbreed, Han Xiao said in surprise. He twisted his arm, and the cub swung around it as well. It was like he was carrying a bag. I shall bring it along as a pet. Raising a pet was a spice of life. With a pet, Han Xiao suddenly felt much more relaxed. No wonder people in the big cities like to have pets, it was such an effective stress reliever. When they were unhappy, they just had to bully their pet, and they could find back their sense of superiority as an intelligent species. This was a sharp claw ice bear cub, only a few months old. Han Xiao was too lazy to give it a name, so he just called it Bear Cub. Bringing along Bear Cub, Han Xiao boarded the plane to the border of Raylan and picked up Hao Tian. Following which, he immediately headed toward the southern continent. On the plane, Hao Tian lived up to his image of a highly skilled player and kept silent, did not ask about their destination, and did not make any interactions. Han Xiao saw that he had nothing to do, so he gave him a mission to take care of Bear Cub. Hao Tian's expression became interesting on the spot. Galaxy's details were all very real, especially the look and smell of urine and feces. Flying from the northern continent to the southern continent required a little over half a day. Han Xiao received a call from Hans on the way, saying that old Devon's document filled missing information of their clues, and it was a very important finding. Han Xiao knew that this would affect the next round of the hidden main storyline missions. The earnings in the northern continent were not lesser than the western continent. Han Xiao's experience and money had all almost doubled. Every time Han Xiao looked at the accumulated experience in the interface and the total of his darknet bank account, he would feel a surge of happiness. When the plane landed in the southern continent, Antonio was waiting. Han Xiao saw his rough face as soon as he came out of the plane. "Welcome back, my friend." Antonio laughed out loud and gave Han Xiao a bear hug. The strong odor on his body almost made Han Xiao lose his health points. "Hug a while more, and I'd be dead." Han Xiao rubbed his nose with a frown. The odor was lingering in the air. "Only out for a month, and look what you've done," Antonio said with surprise. He remembered that Han Xiao said that he would not get into trouble, but it seemed like Han Xiao's standard of trouble and his were very different. Things about Black Phantom had been spreading like a disease recently. Many organizations had to spend some of their focus on Black Phantom. The man had most likely become one of the top names in many organizations' threat lists. Black Phantom had officially reached the top of Darknet's killer leaderboards. After chatting for a while, Antonio noticed Bear Cub. His eyes immediately twinkled, and he ran over to pet it. Han Xiao was not surprised that Antonio liked furry things. Judging from his appearance, the two furballs were probably cousins. Han Xiao walked aside and called Bennett. "I've returned." Bennett breathed a sigh of relief and said with a hint of sorrow, "I've waited for you for so long." Han Xiao went straight to the point and said, "The shelter plan you talked about, what help do you need from me?" Bennett was very touched. Han Xiao mentioned about helping the first thing after he returned. How noble. In the society of lies and deception, people who had such good qualities were going extinct. This was a friend that was worth building a stronger relationship with. Bennett decided to make Han Xiao one of the people in charge of the plan and share even more details with him. "Let's talk when we meet. I have a very important mission for you." Hearing that, Han Xiao knew there was a chance and got excited. He was very familiar with the main storyline shelter plan, and he knew how much benefit there was in becoming a core member. The Six Nations had been making a lot of moves in the dark recently. The preparation for Expedition War was almost complete, and the expedition would probably officially commence in that month. The Germinal organization was finally about to meet the disaster that had been created by Han Xiao, and the war was going to break out in planet Aquamarine. The Wanderers, militaries, warlords, financial organizations, secret organizations, and all the other organizations were nervous about it. To open the shelter plan main storyline at this time completely messed up the sequence of the storyline, but its benefits were also clear. Under the threat from the war, Bennett would do anything to carry out the plan. And the players' attention would also be diverted by the main storyline shelter, which would reduce the number of players taking part in the main storyline of the war between the Six Nations and the Germinal organization, which was beneficial to Han Xiao. The smaller the impact that the players made, the more advantages that the Six Nations had. Chapter 216, Darknet Director, Third Sanctuary. The invitation from Bennett signified his trust. The meeting point this time was the first shelter that Darknet was building, located in a city ruins named Ruins of Lloyd in a wasteland in the northern continent. It had once been the financial center of a dead nation in the northern continent. Han Xiao sat in Bennett's private helicopter. When he looked down at the city from the sky, he could see the building process of the shelter. The first thing he saw was the tens of meters tall enormous wall that was being built. In the areas that had yet to be completed, he could see workers welding steel bars together onto the scaffolding. The concrete of the wall was mixed with other materials and had a metallic feeling to it. With Han Xiao's professional knowledge, he knew that the wall was so strong that smaller rockets would at most only leave traces of burn marks on it. The wall was built to the standards of a fortress. It was extremely expensive. The Darknet symbol was painted on the wall in dark red together with the new name of the city. Bennett Sanctuary 1. The helicopter flew past the wall, and the construction machinery came into sight, clearing the roads and the abandoned buildings. Countless workers in gray uniforms ran around doing their job to lay the foundation for the new buildings and planning the layout of the city. Steel bars, bricks, wood, and other stacks of industrial building materials lay out in the open, and it looked exactly like a gigantic construction site. "You named the shelter after yourself." Han Xiao patted Bennett's shoulder with a smirk. "I didn't know you're this shameless." Bennett slapped the palm on his shoulder away and said, "Let's go. Come to the high-ranked officials meeting with me." "What has the meeting got to do with me?" Han Xiao asked in surprise. Bennett shook his head and laughed. "You're a high-ranked official, too." Han Xiao blinked. Bennett cleared his throat and said, "I strongly recommended you to be a director personally. You won't disappoint me, will you?" Darknet had recently reconstructed their high-ranked officials, with the highest ranking being the founders such as Bennett and one level lower being the various directors. "What are you talking about?" Han Xiao asked with a serious face. "When did I disappoint you?" Bennett did not know whether to laugh or cry. He led the way, and Han Xiao saw the construction of the shelter at a close range. "Sanctuary 1 is our test. I've put in plenty of resources, and it's progressing quite well. The basic layout should be completed within a year. The layout of the shelter is divided into a few sections. In order to have enough basic infrastructure to meet the requirements of its residents, the plants and livestock also needs to form a self-sustained ecosystem so that even if war breaks out in the outside world, the shelter can provide for its own, and the defensive measures are, of course, to defend against enemies." Boom! An abandoned building in front was being demolished, and dust filled the area as it fell down. Han Xiao waved the dust away and said in awe, "Just this shelter would have cost you a huge sum." "The Six Nations' resources can only support 2 to 3 sanctuaries, Bennett said with his hands behind his back. "My plan is to build at least 3 to 5 sanctuaries across the continents. That will be outrageously expensive. This sum of money is insignificant when it comes to preserving our civilization." "Wow, I could almost see the halo above your head," Han Xiao mocked. Bennett's mouth twitched. After arriving at the new fortress, directors of the Darknet gathered in the meeting hall. They stood up and bowed slightly to show their respect when Bennett and Han Xiao walked in. Black Phantom had displayed his strength and was now the top fighting force of Darknet, and with Bennett's support, the high-ranked officials present all agreed that Han Xiao's position was at the same level as theirs. The high-ranked officials reported the progress of Sanctuary 1 in turn, and when Bennett was done settling them, he said, "Sanctuary 1 has been proven to be practical. The message has been sent out. Many wanderers came to look for protection upon hearing the message. With more residents, the building progress can be sped up. At the same time, we can give them job opportunities to take part in the construction process of the shelter, which will aid in strengthening unity. I foresee that in the months to come, as the message of the shelter gets spread out further, more wanderers will come. The construction of shelter has to start sooner rather than later. I have decided to commence the construction of Sanctuary 2 and 3 immediately." The high-ranked officials exchanged looks, and one of them asked hesitantly, "Mr. Bennett, wouldn't that be too much of a rush? Why don't we wait for Sanctuary 1 to be completed?" "Because we don't have much time. We need to speed up the progress. Sanctuary needs someone to be in charge." "Who will be in charge of Sanctuary 2? "Zeno will be in charge of Sanctuary 2, Bennett said. Zeno was currently the highest director of Darknet and had been recommended by many senior officials. Of course, no one opposed this decision. As for Sanctuary 3, Black Phantom will be in charge. Han Xiao's eyebrows shot up. He did not expect Bennett to trust him this much and let him be in charge of an entire shelter. The power of this was very huge. The directors were shocked as well. Black Phantom had just become a high-ranked official, and now he was in charge of such an important issue. It seemed to many that he was not senior enough to do so. Many directors wanted to object, but Bennett had already seen through their thoughts. One simple sentence made their mouths shut. "Each shelter needs someone with extraordinary strength to guard. If any of you have the confidence that your subordinate is stronger than Black Phantom, feel free to object." "Stronger than Black Phantom?" The directors laughed bitterly. Across the entire Darknet, other than Bennett and two others who had already retired, no one could beat Black Phantom. Bennett ended the meeting since no one opposed the decision and brought Han Xiao to a private meeting room. They chatted for a while before Bennett stopped debating with Han Xiao over if there should be a reward for being the person in charge of Sanctuary 3. He faced Han Xiao's look of contempt without any shame and showcased the detailed plan of Sanctuary 3. Sanctuary 3's construction is basically completed. Its location will be in Grey Metal Ruins. Han Xiao thought that place sounded quite familiar, and then he remembered that Grey Metal Ruins was where he had set up his secret base. It was quite a coincidence. Bennett briefly explained the layout and that Han Xiao's mission was to sit in, monitor the construction team, and when any threat arose nearby, he could settle it entirely by himself. There was only one requirement: complete the construction of the shelter. Han Xiao almost fell asleep because of how boring and tedious the explanation was, and at this time, a notification popped up in the interface. Han Xiao was immediately awake. "You have unlocked a new organization, Darknet Organization. Subsidiary Blood Pact Society detected. Relationship status, respect, 4450/6000, rank 1 of Killer Leaderboard. Darknet Organization initial relationship, friendly, 2225/3000, Director." Part of the reason Han Xiao was able to become a high-ranked official of the Darknet was because of Bennett. If a player wanted to gain a high position in Darknet, the relationship had to be at least respect, and to become a high-ranked official, it had to be at least reverence. However, the prerequisite for Han Xiao was not that strict, which was a benefit of being an NPC. It was not restricted by the rigid requirements in the interface. "You have triggered the Rank A mission Sanctuary Plan Sanctuary 3. Seeing the mission requirements, Han Xiao smiled. It was as he expected. As the person in charge of Sanctuary 3, his mission was construction, and the mission type was also a series mission that was divided into tens of requirements. Each of them was one part of the construction blueprint. For every part of the construction that was completed, one requirement would be considered met, which included defensive measures, residential areas, bases, buildings, cleaning the ruins, plantations, farms, and many more. It was like modifying a city. The mission also notified him that if an unexpected situation appeared, he would also be entirely in charge of solving it, and the grading might become lower or higher depending on the situation and results. The more requirements that were completed, the higher the completion grading would be, and the rewards would be given based on the grading. For the players, they could take on this main storyline normally, but their situation was completely different from Han Xiao's. The players had to take on different missions from the lowest ranked or middle ranked personnel and take part in the construction from side missions. On the other hand, Han Xiao received the overall mission, which included all the side missions and main storyline missions. This was a benefit of becoming the core member of the plan. He was very clear on what needed to be done. Also, his reward was far greater than the players. The fragmented missions that players completed would all be considered as part of the construction in the end, which indirectly met his requirements. As mentioned before, the requirement for the same mission might even differ based on who was doing it, and with the special relationship Han Xiao had with Darknet, he received this mission that had loads of benefits. However, there are some problems. Bennett cleared his throat and said, due to funding constraints, the resources are concentrated in Sanctuary 1 and 2. Therefore, there might be not as many people who will be working with you to build Sanctuary 3. How many? Han Xiao suddenly had a bad feeling. Sanctuary 1 had tens of thousands of workers, so he would require a similar workforce. About 1,000. Han Xiao squinted with an expression that said, are you kidding me? It's mainly because of the flow of the funding not reaching its destination, Bennett said awkwardly. This will only be the case for the first month. We will hire more people to help you afterward. Han Xiao picked Bear Cub, who was sleeping on his laps, and threw it toward Bennett. Bear Cub fell onto the sofa upside down and finally opened its eyes slowly. Hit him. Han Xiao pointed toward Bennett. Bear Cub blinked in confusion and only understood after staring at Han Xiao's finger for a very long time. It then turned over and slapped Bennett's left cheek. Bennett laughed bitterly. He rubbed Bear Cub's furry buttock, then pushed it aside and said, I know it's difficult, but you're the only person that can help me. No one else has the ability to. Han Xiao pondered for a while before he nodded and said, no worries, I will be able to build a basic layout within a month. Bennett's requirements for Sanctuary 3 were very low. As long as the construction was stable and the ruins were cleaned within a month, it was more than enough. He took Han Xiao's words as a joke and didn't take it to heart at all. By the way, I have another requirement, Han Xiao said. What is it? Bennett replied. Han Xiao laughed and said, Sanctuary 3 has to be named after me. Since Bennett had already done that, how could the great mechanic Han Xiao not receive the same treatment? And by naming the shelter after himself, it would definitely create a strong, long-term impact. Chapter 217, Class Advancement of the Players. Many of the directors were not happy with the fact that Black Phantom was in charge of Sanctuary 3, but when they heard that Sanctuary 3 was short of labor and that Han Xiao had actually received a very difficult task, they felt much better. That should be the right way, letting the newcomer do the difficult jobs. However, Bennett gathered the directors and announced an appointment. Black Phantom is my friend, and he doesn't have much experience. Everyone here was involved in the construction of Sanctuary 1, so I will appoint one director to be Black Phantom's consultant and assistant. The directors panicked for a little. They exchanged looks discreetly, all hoping not to be appointed. Going to Sanctuary 3 was like being sent to the borders. There would not be any contribution within a month, and there was really not much benefit in being Black Phantom's assistant. There also was not much credit to working under someone. All in all, it was a terrible job, and they would much prefer to stay and wait for other opportunities. Although the motive behind Bennett's sanctuary plan signified greatness and justice, the directors under him did not feel the same. All they saw in the shelter plan were the benefits that they could garner from it. In their eyes, this was a new round of power reshuffle. If they could be in charge of a shelter, the weight of their words would become much heavier in the future. Bennett knew what these high-ranked officials were thinking, but he did not give any explanation because the benefits could motivate the directors to work harder. Bennett did not expect everyone to be so noble. This was all part of his plan. Not many people could catch Bennett's eyes, but Han Xiao was one of them. This guy was really a great friend. All he wanted was to help, and even when he mentioned rewards, it was mostly in a joking manner. He never insisted on it. Bennett was someone who took profits very lightly, and he noticed that Han Xiao had a similar quality, which was why he felt a sense of closeness toward Han Xiao. He decided to appoint someone who was very capable to be Han Xiao's assistant. Bennett looked around and said, Huang Yu, you'll help Black Phantom. The face of the guy called Huang Yu immediately dropped. He answered unwillingly, and when he saw the gloating faces of the other directors, he became even more unhappy. Among the directors of Darknet, Huang Yu was someone with very high capabilities. He was often entrusted with important issues as he excelled in taking care of all types of cumbersome issues and had always arranged them very neatly. Yet, this time, he had been appointed by Bennett to be an assistant. He was not happy and was not willing to do it, which would, of course, lead to him not taking things seriously. He had already decided to face Black Phantom lackadaisically and pass the 1 month without being serious. He took it as giving himself a holiday. The idea of shelters had appeared in the minds of others during the Old Era War as well. Back then, when the nations were busy with the war, many people had lost their homes and wandered the streets. Therefore, one private group started to build a shelter and helped war refugees at all costs. It succeeded initially and protected tens of thousands of people. However, because of the shortage of resources, the food distributed to the refugees became limited, which sparked unhappiness among them. Humans cannot be content, especially during times of war, and even a slight idea of malice will be expanded indefinitely. Those refugees had forgotten the people who helped them in their time of need and fought back. In the end, they took over the shelter and killed its original owners. In such a chaotic world, things like that happened very often. It was not the shelter that did not work, but the old era did not allow it. Coincidentally, the person who created the shelter during the old era was Bennett's friend. Bennett had never given up on the idea, and he felt now was the right time. Han Xiao was familiar with the storyline. He knew that Bennett's sanctuary plan had succeeded, and it grew like a snowball. Even the people in the cities were willing to move to the shelters. It was so successful that it was almost on a trend to become a nation, which caused an alarm within the 6 nations. If it was not for mutation disaster during version 2.0, the 6 nations might even have become hostile toward the shelters. The shelters only fully utilized themselves during version 2.0. By then, they were considered to have lived up to their name. I'm now in charge of Sanctuary 3. This time, it's truly a large part of the main storyline. The manpower assigned to me is not enough, but I still have the players. Han Xiao had already thought of how to do the Sanctuary mission a long time ago. A helicopter landed in Sanctuary 1. Frenzied Sword and Bun Hit Dog walked out and looked around in curiosity. They trotted toward Han Xiao with smiles on their faces as soon as they saw him. Frenzied Sword had a lot of questions to ask, but it all stuck in his mind when he saw Hao Tian, who stood on the side. God player Hao Tian, he exclaimed in surprise. Hao Tian gave him a faint look and did not say anything too cool. Wow, legend. Bun Hit Dog widened his eyes and asked, did you trigger the hidden storyline as well? Hao Tian turned his head and did not reply. How cold of the legend. Bun Hit Dog was speechless, and Frenzied Sword was much better after all. This time, Bear Cub made a sound. Hao Tian immediately dashed forward and picked Bear Cub up. He took out tissues from his back with seriousness on his face. The duo suddenly understood why Hao Tian did not want to speak. They discreetly took a few steps backward. The smell was really bad. Seeing Hao Tian's serious expression and skilled actions, Frenzied Sword felt respect toward him. What a true legend, doesn't even change his expression. The first meeting between the players was very peaceful to Han Xiao. He looked at Bun Hit Dog. This reporter would be of use for what he was going to do next. 3 days later. Congratulations to the player White Mask for completing the first class advancement. Every player received a notification from their interface. The first player to reach LV21 in the level leaderboards, White Mask, was a foreign player. He shared the changes after his class advancement on the forums. The players on planet Aquamarine suddenly discovered that energy training technique would automatically be awakened with the class advancement. The people had doubts at the start, but as more and more players advanced in their class, it was proven that everyone would awaken this ability after their class advancement. The players on planet Aquamarine was stunned. The ability that they had spent experience to learn was actually an ability that would automatically be awakened after class advancement. Was that bad? Many players did not think so. To learn a high-level ability in advance did not seem like a bad thing. It was a growth ability after all, and it had a very good effect. It could largely increase one's strength during low levels, which was very useful for these players who were discovering new locations. The people who really suffered were the players in the northern continent who only learned it at LV 18 or 19. They had wasted their money on an ability that they would very soon awaken upon class advancement. They were filled with grief. The southern continent players, who had been depressed for a very long time, suddenly realized that they were not the unluckiest, and they suddenly felt much happier. Although the truth of energy training technique was revealed, many low-level players still felt that it was worth it to learn this ability in advance. Therefore, many Andrea players were still waiting for Han Xiao's arrival, but what they were faced with was only shock. Black Phantom had returned to the southern continent. He was not going to Andrea anymore. When Han Xiao had been in the western continent and the northern continent, players in Andrea had anticipated that they were going to be the last ones, but the truth was too cruel. Han Xiao was not going there at all. Their hope had resulted in disappointment. The players in Andrea were full of sorrow. The Planet Aquamarine section on the forums was heated. Even foreign players from the other planets joined in, yet players in Andrea had no position to say anything. It had almost been 2 months since the official public launch. The average level of the earliest players was close to 20. With more and more new players joined the game, the number of players on Planet Aquamarine had reached hundreds of thousands, and it was still growing. The high-level players started to slowly interfere in the storyline of their planets, digging through the history, the environment, and joining the main storyline. It was the same for Planet Aquamarine. More and more players were recruited by the Six Nations to be a special unit. The players had heard from the NPCs that the Six Nations expedition against the Germinal organization would commence at any moment. However, the interface had notified them that their level was not high enough to meet the prerequisites for the expedition mission, which meant that even if they followed the army to join the expedition, most of them would not receive any rewards. Most importantly, with the current strength of the players, they would be easily slaughtered by the army. This was the effect of Han Xiao bringing the main storyline forward. The players had lost the time that they should have had to become stronger and join the war immediately. Also, the organizations of Planet Aquamarine had finally noticed that there was a limit to the number of times the players could revive, which made them more relieved. They felt that at least the Inhumans had flaws. They were not as nervous as before and started to take the Inhumans as a special kind of mercenaries. At this time, a new issue of Bun Hit Dog's Galaxy Exploration Journal was released. Chapter 218, Didn't Know You Are This Kind of Black Phantom? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wild Boy, a member of Sky Territory Guild, was a loyal fan of Bun Hit Dog. There were many types of Galaxy video hosts on the forum, but Bun Hit Dog was the only one that had first-hand information about Black Phantom, which meant that he was always ahead of other video hosts. Wild Boy liked videos about Black Phantom very much. He was really attracted to the dark and mysterious feeling that Black Phantom gave. As soon as Bun Hit Dog updated, Wild Boy saw it. He clicked into it immediately and commented before the video even started. International rule, ask for new updates before watching. The video started playing, and Bun Hit Dog's bitchy voice appeared. Pure white legs and cherry red lips, rip your skin and harden your bones, take off these clothes and these pants, drunk by choice but not by booze, cup of Viagra is all I need, I will last through the night. Hello everyone, welcome to the Galaxy Exploration Journal. Audience, this is me as always, the different kind of Bun Hit Dog. Wild Boy spat out a mouthful of water. It was a standard procedure to always start with a poem every episode. The words used became more and more shameless. Even Wild Boy, who had a strong ID, could not take it anymore. The comments would always explode when the poems came. It was so much that even the screen was obstructed. I once had both knowledge and fighting skills, but now I can only yell 666. Clear theme, good poem. I'm calling the police. I sang along although I'm a girl. Extraordinary level of dirtiness. I can't stop singing it. Please be considerate toward the feelings of lady fans. Reported, you're welcome. The last episode had been about Bun Hit Dog and Frenzied Sword making a mess in Black Pine. This episode was a continuation, and the audience enjoyed it very much. When the mission was completed and the show entered the second half, the scene suddenly changed to a city that was being built. The large Bennett Sanctuary one came into audience's sights. In the scene, Han Xiao wore a black coat and stood with his hands behind his back. The comments stopped for a moment before suddenly exploding. Wow, I get to see my Uncle Black again. Great video host, have a recommendation ticket. After so many days, Black Phantom could finally be seen in Bun Hit Dog's video, and Bun Hit Dog was the only person who could do this. The audience felt a sense of grace. It was like seeing someone they knew. Since the public launch, Han Xiao had been in the sights of the players, and he had already made an impact and occupied a special position in the hearts of the players. Wild Boy opened his eyes wide. He did not want to miss even 1 second. Black Phantom brought us into a special scene going during construction. During this time, I discovered main storyline missions from Black Phantom. The audience discussed among each other within the comments. The players knew that Han Xiao gave out main storyline missions, and the requirements for receiving the hidden storyline were very high. Could this main storyline mission be a different one? Bun Hit Dog showcased his mission list, and a new mission appeared within, Black Phantom Sanctuary 3. What's this? There's Black Phantom in the mission name. What's a sanctuary? It is very similar to the name of this place. Bun Hit Dog explained the inside information with excitement. Darknet was building shelters, and Black Phantom had brought a group of 1,000 people to Grey Metal Ruins to build a city. This information had been gained from Han Xiao himself. There were not any prior requirements this time, the mission could be triggered easily. After the mission introduction ended, the comments section was filled with shock once more. It's the construction of a city. My god, that's such a large main storyline. Almost as huge as the Expedition War. This should be part of the Planet Aquamarine main storyline, too. Wild Boy paused the video. He read the mission requirements carefully again and again, then swallowed his saliva before playing the video. Without even having time to think about what the sanctuary actually was, he saw in the video that Han Xiao was yelling at the people below him. The overcast of war obscured the blue skies like the wings of death, and the scars of the previous war have been torn apart before they could even heal. Only a few decades have passed, but no one has forgotten the pain that the war cast upon the land. Up till today, it is still affecting the ground under us and the skies above us. Radiation, specks of dust, wasteland, and dead nations. How ridiculous. After the old era, our civilian technology regressed, but the military technology that is used against our own kind has been advancing continuously. They fight for their ideals and the nation's benefits, they used iron and fire to spread death. For these empty and false reasons, they slaughtered those of their own kind who had no power to defend themselves. Countless people have been killed in the fires of war. The world became wounded and broken because of them, and it is on its way to the end. The ending of the world might quietly be upon us one day. The construction of the shelters is for preserving our civilization. Even if the world ends tomorrow, I still want to save the last bit of tinder for the civilization. I don't possess greatness, but too many are small. If no one wants to pay the price, okay, I will be the first. But I know, I won't be the last. Han Xiao's tone was filled with cadence. Wild Boy felt short of breath. Although he was watching a video, he could feel his blood turning hot in his heart. That raw emotion was extremely infectious. Wild Boy was not the only one who was shocked by this. The comment "I don't possess greatness, but too many are small" passed by the screen with 3 exclamation marks behind. It looked very impactful. Didn't know you are this kind of Black Phantom. Many comments similar to this also flew on the screen. In the player's mind, Black Phantom was quiet and did not speak much, but this speech that he had given had turned this impression completely upside down. Many players felt more familiar with Han Xiao. They had not expected Black Phantom's ideals to be this great. Wild Boy was very excited after he finished watching. This time, he saw Jade Green Sky announcing a message in the guild channel. Attention everyone, the guild will be collecting Grey Metal Ruins location and information. The intelligence provider will be rewarded. One day earlier, Han Xiao gathered the group of 1,000 people who followed him to build the city and gave out the speech in the video. Bennett just wanted him to say something casually at the time, but he did not expect him to say this much. Bennett was as shocked as the players. The workers around stopped what they were doing and gathered. The number of people became more and more. They all looked up at Han Xiao, who was standing on the tall platform. Seeing the crowd turning excited, Han Xiao knew that it was extremely effective. This paragraph had been copied from Bennett's speech in the future, and its intention was exactly to shock everyone. Back then, Bennett's position in the hearts of the players had been decided because of his noble ideals. Now that Han Xiao had said it first, no matter what happened in the future, the players would be reminded of him when they brought up Bennett, which would make stronger impacts in the impression the players had of him, making himself more valuable. He knew that players liked to see such things. A character with noble ideals was usually very popular, and Bennett did not need to care about the players' impression of him, so Han Xiao grabbed the opportunity. At the same time, Bennett would be touched as well. Doing this had many benefits. Players all love the story that a character has, as it shows unique sparkling points of their personality. Han Xiao nodded discreetly. He wanted the players to seek him out after the impression that he had created, and whether or not those were his real thoughts, no one would know if he did not say. Han Xiao turned around and saw Bennett's expression. It was filled impassioned. These words had really expressed his mind. Of course they would, since they originated from him. Bennett was very touched. Han Xiao had voiced the deepest thoughts in his mind. He realized that he was beginning to like Han Xiao more and more. It was like rain and poured on the desert in his heart. Bennett realized that he was not alone anymore. He had found someone that was walking down the same path as him. It's all for the continuation of the civilization. He understands me. Bennett gave Han Xiao a pleased look. Speech is a very scary ability. It can encourage the hearts of the people. Originally, many workers there went for the money, but now, they felt like their hearts were filled with something more, and they became much more motivated. The directors were shocked as well. They did not think that the Black Phantom, who had killed countless people, had such ideals. Despite their own motives, they were immediately impressed. The next day, the construction team of Sanctuary 3 gathered. The enormous convoy crossed the desolate wilderness and disappeared over the horizon, leaving only dust behind. The convoy was equipped with a scouting helicopter that was flying at a low height. It was the ride for important personnel so that they could escape in the face of danger. However, Han Xiao decided to take the car. Huang Yu, on the other hand, took the helicopter without hesitation. He was not going to be sucking up to Han Xiao. Han Xiao sat in the back seat. He felt the vibration of the off-road truck and browsed the information of the team. A notification popped up on the interface at this time. Current target, protect the convoy until it arrives at Grey Metal Ruins. Current population, 1034. Upon arrival at the destination, 250,000 experience will be rewarded if the damage is below 20%. Mission grading will also be increased. Current grading, E. A sudden notification of the mission goal. This is a characteristic of long-term missions. Han Xiao raised his eyebrows. Suddenly, he realized that he has been moving his eyebrows too much recently. That was not good. He needed to be more serious. Sanctuary 3's mission grading changed in real time, and the grading could be seen to increase when a requirement was met. The mission had just started, and nothing had been done yet. Thus, it was at the lowest grade, E. 700 people in the team were workers and technicians. The rest of the 300 were soldiers and guards. Divided into teams of 20, the guards stationed around the exterior of the convoy. Military power is not enough. I have to strengthen the team. The power of one person was limited. However, he was a mechanic with a lot of assets. Chapter 219, The Brutal Force of Mechanic. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. It required 4 to 5 days to travel from Sanctuary 1 to Grey Metal Ruins across the wilderness, so the convoy could only camp in the wild. At around dusk of the first day after departure, at Han Xiao's orders, the convoy found a safe terrain in the wild and settled down. It was dangerous to travel after the sun set, and many beasts were active during the night. The soldiers of Darknet patrolled the surrounding areas in shifts. Han Xiao gathered the important people in the team for a meeting: Assistant Huang Yu, Head of Construction Coney Fury, and Guard Captain Lu Zhao. The blueprints of the Grey Metal Ruins modification plan were laid out on the table, and Coney Fury was speaking. The initial modifications of the entire city were estimated to be completed in 3 months, including weeding, getting rid of the beasts, cleaning of ruins, then completing the basic layout of the shelter, planting of the electricity network and water pipes, etc. But this is a plan based on 30,000 workers. We only have 1,000 in the first month. There's nothing we can do, not even cleaning the ruins. Coney Fury sighed. Han Xiao nodded without giving approval or denial. He looked at Huang Yu and asked, "Do you have any suggestions?" Huang Yu said perfunctorily, "No." Noticing the careless attitude of Huang Yu, Han Xiao roughly guessed what he was thinking. But Han Xiao didn't care about it. It was not like he needed an assistant. He turned his head and said, "Manpower is not a problem. I plan to complete the blueprint construction within a month." Coney Fury was stunned. That will need at least 100,000 workers. Even Sanctuary 1 doesn't have that many workers. I have my ways. Han Xiao did not explain his plan in further detail. Huang Yu stood by and watched. The amount of money needed to hire 100,000 workers was extremely large, and even with so much money, it was not certain they could hire that many workers. He did not understand where Han Xiao got his confidence from. Lu Zhao suddenly pressed his headphones and said hastily, "Mr. Black Phantom, an airplane is closing in. Let's go out and take a look." Walking out of the camp, the guards looked at the sky on alert. In the dark night sky, a large airplane flashing signal lights was heading toward them. Whether it was friend or foe was unknown. "It's okay." Han Xiao smiled. "That's the airdrop I called." The plane flew past above their heads and dropped a few huge resources boxes that were tied together. The parachute opened, and it landed not far from the camp. The symbol on the boxes belonged to the Fabian company. Han Xiao made use of his relationship network and had Fabian's plane airdrop him a large number of mechanical parts. It definitely was not free, but Han Xiao had a lot of money. Such a small spend meant nothing to him. Everyone was relieved upon hearing that it was a false alarm. Huang Yu was secretly surprised. To be able to call an airdrop from the renowned munitions company Fabian, Han Xiao's relationship network was broader than he thought. These parts were worth millions of dollars. Han Xiao ordered people to load them onto the resources vehicles and started to build a large amount of machinery. He was very rich now, so he could build all sorts of combat machinery, and they could be used to protect the team as well. The most famous combat style of mechanics was the Sea of Machinery. Han Xiao stayed in the car and worked for the next 2 days of the journey. The convoy had arrived at the desert. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and the high temperature had turned the sand as hot as burning steel. Even light was distorted around the air not far from the ground. The convoy stopped under a barbara tree. This type of tree was unique to the desert of planet Aquamarine. It was also called Umbrella of Life. Its shade was like an island that insulated the heat, and its juices were plenty and sweet, which could be used to quench thirst immediately. The people were very thirsty. The soldiers patrolled around, and everyone was covered in sweat. Boom! The desert far away suddenly turned into waves. A huge number of enormous beetles crawled out of the ground. Each of them over half a meter long, they had brown and shiny shells, 6 feet, and 2 claws. They moved toward the barbara tree like a wave. Beast attack! The alarm was activated. 300 soldiers immediately stood in position holding their guns. When they noticed that the sea of beetles had surrounded them from every direction and there was nowhere to escape, their faces became horrified, and their hands started trembling. The desert blood shell crab was a strong predator in the deserts that destroyed every life form wherever they passed by, and there were at least 10,000 of them here. Into the cars and drive open a path. Huang Yu yelled hastily. He then rushed up the helicopter and hurried the pilot to take off immediately. No one had the thought of fighting when they faced this many bugs. When they heard Huang Yu's order and were just about to enter the cars to escape, Han Xiao walked out of the car and said, "Don't panic. Everyone stand in position. Get ready to face the enemy." "The number of bugs is too huge," Captain Lu Zhao said hastily. "Our defense can't cover all directions. We will most likely suffer a huge loss if we fight." "Black Phantom, come to the helicopter quickly," Huang Yu shouted. Han Xiao waved his hands. Huang Yu cursed in his head. Seeing that the sea of bugs was coming even closer, he told the pilot to take off immediately without caring about Han Xiao. The pilot was afraid as well, therefore, he followed the order and piloted the helicopter off the ground. The troops on the ground did not dare disobey Han Xiao's order. They stood their ground and watched nervously as the swarm of bugs rapidly approached. At this moment, Han Xiao took out his laptop and pressed a few buttons. Ho-yu-ha-um. 12 combat rangers drove out of the logistics vehicles as fast as normal cars. Everyone's face was filled with shock as they looked at these rover robots rapidly spreading out into all directions like guards of iron. The cold metallic color reflected the light shining through the leaves like pieces of golden scales. These rovers were the newest and improved Generation 2.5. Han Xiao had leveled up the blueprint many times. The basic attributes of the machinery that he had built was much higher, and its quality was at blue as well. The Generation 2.5 rovers were all equipped with an auto fire control system, which improved its firepower and magazine continuation ability. They were around the same height as humans, and their mobility was much higher because of the triangular caterpillar tracks that they were equipped with, which could traverse much tougher terrain. Han Xiao knew that it would not be peaceful during the journey when the mission notification showed up, so he had called for airdrop and built a lot of machinery over the past 2 days. Han Xiao's building speed had become much quicker, and the rover robot that would have taken him days to complete at LV-20 could now be completed in just tens of minutes. When the building speed of a mechanic exceeded a certain limit, they would be able to build on the spot in the battlefield. With enough materials, weapons could be built non-stop. Only high-level mechanics could have this ability after learning instant assembly. This was also a very important factor in the rise of mechanics in version 3.0. Unload all the round metal plates in the car and place them in every direction. The Darknet soldiers completely followed whatever he said. They immediately did as they were told and placed the 20 round metal plates on the ground. Han Xiao activated the program, and the plates started to transform. Their base fixed into the ground, and the stacked modules assembled into gun barrels. The entire process only took 4 to 5 seconds. These were mini folding batteries. Han Xiao had also leveled up the blueprints, and they now had smart firepower control. Seeing the sturdy, black, long gun barrels, the soldiers felt safer. When the swarm reached within 400 meters, the Generation 2.5 rovers and the mini batteries fired simultaneously. With the camp under the Barbara tree as the center, a storm of bullets bloomed toward every direction. The sound of fire was in sync, and the rain of bullets spread all over the place. Ta 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 ta. In an instant, green-colored gunk exploded within the swarm as steel and fire penetrated the huge beetles one after another. In the face of the killing machines built by mankind, the shells that the desert blood shell crabs were so proud of were as fragile as eggshells. A trench had formed 400 meters away from the camp, filled with corpses of the bugs, stopping the swarm from moving closer. Even the desert was damp by their blood. After a round of fire, the swarm became at least a third smaller. A few rangers drove out of the camp. They were equipped with sunworm flamethrowers. The cone of fire covered the swarm, and the sound of bugs being burnt alive soon reverberated in the convoy's ears. The claws of the desert blood shell crab could not harm the platinum alloy armor of the rangers at all. With the fearsome firepower, it was a one-sided slaughter. This was the brutal force of a mechanic. Group combat was the advantage a mechanic had. Esper and Pugilist might be very strong fighters, but their physical strength had its limits. However, money was the limitation for a mechanic. That machinery had cost millions of dollars, and even a max-level player in version 1.0 could barely afford it. The ammunition cost was also extremely expensive as thousands of steel core armor-piercing bullets were used every second. Money had been a problem for mechanics since the beginning. Building an army of machines was a very strong combat style of the mechanic class, but it was also the most expensive one. When the average level of the enemies become higher and they become stronger, the machinery army had to have higher standards and technology in them, which meant that their cost would increase as well. Normal players could not master the army combat style very well. Even if they used all their money to build an army, they would not be able to withstand the cost of repairing the damage after combat. The army style was usually used as a last resort. However, Han Xiao was not bothered by the money problem since he had his ways of making a lot of money. He did not yet want to rely completely on the army combat style, he just wanted to build a simple guarding team that had enough firepower in times of need. Lu Zhao held his assault rifle all the time and waited to fire when the swarm entered the range of 300 meters, but the swarm was stopped at 400 meters away by the rain of iron. His hands were even tired from holding the rifle, yet he still did not see any need to fire. This firepower is way too strong. Lu Zhao looked at the batteries beside him that were firing bullets continuously. Their bolts moved front and back automatically, the bullet shells poured onto the ground, some even hit his face. With surprise, Lu Zhao realized he had nothing to do. Black Phantom's machinery had dealt with all the enemies, the guards assigned by Darknet had been of no use at all. They had been ruthlessly rendered utterly useless. Chapter 220, Arrival. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The battle only lasted for 15 minutes. The waves of iron slaughtered the entire swarm, and white slurry covered the ground, giving off an extremely stinky odor as it was vaporized by the high temperature. The team was completely unharmed. The people looked at Han Xiao, who was calmly smoking a cigarette, and felt very safe. They had been rather afraid when they left the sanctuary, as the wilderness of planet Aquamarine was filled with danger, but with the way they looked at it now, there would not be any danger as long as Han Xiao was around. Lu Zhao realized that the team of guards that he led had become the ones being guarded instead, and admiration toward Han Xiao blossomed in his heart. The strong would always be admired. Your machinery killed Desert Blood Shell Crab, LV-15. You received 10 experience. When one's level was too much higher than the monster killed, the experience received would be largely reduced. One bug only gave 10 EXP, but there were at least 10,000 of them. Han Xiao looked at the interface. He had received more than 100,000 EXP. The circling helicopter landed. Huang Yu had been watching from the helicopter earlier on, and he was overwhelmed when he saw the endless swarm falling like patches of wheat being cut down, the endless rain of bullets blooming like flowers, and the camp remaining completely unharmed. Huang Yu had actually been planning to escape in the helicopter, and he had almost wanted to leave the others behind. Now that danger has been averted, his expression became quite awkward. It felt like the surrounding people all looked at him with disgust and unhappiness in their eyes. The mechanic class is actually this strong. Hao Tian contemplated as he held Bear Cub. He was a pugilist, and now he was unavoidably worried about his future in the pro scene. On the other hand, Frenzied Sword, who had been a godly pugilist player in Han Xiao's previous life, was even gladder that he had chosen the mechanic class. More material. Bun Hit Dog's face was filled with happiness. It seemed unlikely he'd ever have to worry about finding content for his videos again as long as he followed behind Black Phantom. The 3 players who had triggered the mission to protect the team received a rather good amount of experience without having to do anything. Frenzied Sword and Bun Hit Dog were used to this uncommon occurrence, but it was the first time for Hao Tian. Seeing the experience bar growing a rather large amount, Hao Tian had mixed feelings. The amount of earning that he had gotten from doing missions tirelessly was not even worth it compared to following Han Xiao and doing nothing. No wonder so many people wanted to trigger Black Phantom's hidden storyline. Even a godly pro player like him almost wanted to do the same. The danger of the wilderness came from beasts, robbers, and radiation, but with the iron war machines protecting them, the numerous beast attacks that they met along the way were all easily resolved. It was a treacherous journey indeed, but there was no real danger. When they were just 1 day away from arriving in Grey Metal Ruins, the convoy set up camp. It was a night with clear skies, and if one looked up the skies, the entire river of stars would be reflected in one's eyes. The technological environment of planet Aquamarine was similar to Earth, but its nature was more beautiful. In Star Zone 9 of the Garden Galaxy, the civilization density of the star zone was very low, but the planets were very concentrated. Many empty planets were taken again and again, caught by the stars with the highest density. They began to orbit around them. Planet Aquamarine was one of the planets orbiting around a fixed star at a distance that allowed for a temperature that was suitable enough for human habitation. There are also a few natural satellites orbiting around planet Aquamarine, which were moons that reflected light from the fixed star to the planets in the dark side of their rotations. Before the old era, there were countries that had built a rocket ship to land on the natural satellites, but they were desolate. The opportunity that made the Godaran civilization contact planet Aquamarine happened when one of Godara's interstellar spectrometers captured the waves in space made by planet Aquamarine's primitive rocket ship. Godara was a galactic civilization in the Garden Galaxy. The areas that they explored included many star zones of the Garden Galaxy, but they were more of a law-enforcing organization, contacting civilizations with friendly motives. Recently, Han Xiao had read a bit about the research that the nations in planet Aquamarine had regarding astrology. The players could access this information through various sources as well, and it was incredibly detailed and real, which made the players feel a very strong sense of reality. With the perspective of an NPC, Han Xiao could see more information. In the camps, as Han Xiao and Coney Fury were discussing the blueprint, a guard came in to report. "Your Excellency, we captured a wanderer. He has been lingering near our camps." It was a teen wanderer with worn-out clothing. He had a double-barrel hunting gun, which had been confiscated by the guards. Upon seeing the camp that was filled with armed guards, horror showed on his face, and he started trembling. Han Xiao had an idea and asked, "Is there a colony nearby?" Lu Zhao looked at the map and said, "There are a few medium-sized colonies." Han Xiao nodded and looked at the teenager with a pondering look. The teenager felt that the eyes of this man in black before him were so pressurizing that his legs started to soften. Before Han Xiao questioned, he explained in tremble and said, "I'm a wanderer from a nearby colony. I was out to hunt for food and coincidentally saw you guys passing by, so I wanted to take a closer look." Han Xiao touched his chin and contemplated for a while. Seeing this teenager looked undernourished and emaciated, he said, "Lu Zhao, get him some food." The teenager was stunned for a moment. "Return to your colony and tell your people that my team will be building a city in the Grey Metal Ruins. We will provide a large number of paid jobs. They're also welcome to join us. Let your chief know my intentions." We hope they can move in and take residence. The heavy bag of food brought the teenager back to his senses. His face was filled with relief and surprise. He was a hunter of the colony. With very little prey recently, the people in the colony had not eaten much food and had been starving. This food could give them several filling meals. The teenager had been very scared when he was captured, but now that he had found that these people were not evil, he was much more relieved and started to consider Han Xiao's suggestion. Most of the wanderers did not have the luxury to enjoy full stomachs, so the prospect of work in exchange for food was indeed tempting. After having someone send a teenager away, Han Xiao took out the map and said, "Grey Metal Ruins is isolated. There's no human habitation within 30 miles, but there are about more than a dozen colonies further away, mostly small ones, totaling at about 2,000 to 3,000 people. Lu Zhao, take some people and food along with you, and spread the news about us building a sanctuary." The original intention of a sanctuary was to protect wanderers in the wilderness. Thus, it was normal to attract wanderers to move in. Huang Yu thought that he had seen through Han Xiao's plan and thought to himself, he actually wants to hire wanderers as workers, but it's still too few. Han Xiao wanted to complete the basic layout of the sanctuary blueprint in a month, which needed at least 100,000 people. There were way too few wanderers for that. Huang Yu shook his head. He felt the one-month plan would very most likely fail. It would not damage the organization, but it definitely would damage Black Phantom's prestige and face. Being unable to live up to his word, other high-ranked officials' impression of him would definitely worsen. I will appeal to return to the headquarters after staying for a month anyway, Huang Yu thought. There were no opportunities to contribute or gain benefits, so he did not want to waste his time being an assistant in Sanctuary 3. Concerned with that arrangement, Lu Zhao said, "But if we spread out the guards, the defensive power of the team won't be enough." Han Xiao pointed toward the Generation 2.5 Rangers that patrolled the camp with their pre-programmed routes and gave a faint laugh. "I'll give you another chance to respond. I ensure the completion of the mission." Lu Zhao changed his words immediately and stood straight. The endless plains of karst were maroon and looked like coagulated blood. Han Xiao had returned once again. It was a familiar view. Come to think about it, I haven't been back to my base for quite a long time, Han Xiao thought. His base had been in standby mode as he did not really use it. The outline of the grey metal ruins appeared in sight. There had once been a broad road on the plains, but after years of no maintenance, it was now filled with weeds. The concrete had cracked open, and greens grew from within. Old newspapers flew slowly along its roads, and the long extinguished street lights were covered in vines. It was a view filled with despair. The convoy pressed on, and the only noise to be heard for miles was the sound of many determined engines and wheels further cracking a lot of already cracked concrete as they rolled proudly along the broken roads. The entrance of the grey metal ruins was a broad and largely abandoned space. The staggering amount of work that was needed to turn this abandoned city into a real sanctuary had the people seriously feeling the pressure. You have arrived at grey metal ruins. Current population, 1034. Damage, 0%. Target complete. You have received 250,000 experience. Mission grade has become D-. The main storyline mission that Han Xiao had received was Construct Sanctuary 3, it was a large mission that oversaw the entire process. Therefore, according to the tens of building types that a sanctuary required, it was divided into tens of construction requirements. The current mission target changed. Current target, complete blueprint construction in 3 months. Current time, day 1. In 3 months, complete all the 13 construction requirements as stated below, expand/collapse. Rewards, 800,000 experience, plus 1,250 darknet prestige, increased mission grading. Extra requirement, if construction is completed in advance, bonus rewards and grading will be awarded based on the number of days. Experience reward, plus 10% per day.